All right. Hey, that was our fearless leader, Dave Weinbaum. He's not here today, um, and he was reaching really deep down and finally found me available to guest host today on the show. So we're going to do some stuff kind of like what we did last time. We're going to try to pick a little bit of a central theme to get our guests to talk on. And then, of course, we'll get out into the weeds on everything like we normally do. So um, today we're going to be kind of focusing on where we're at today as far as COVID is concerned. It turns out that a lot of the folks that were telling us stuff back when COVID happened, now we're finding out that they were actually right. It wasn't conspiracy theory after all, and it wasn't misinformation and vax denying and all of the other stuff that was said about folks who were trying to put a little common sense into our response to COVID vaccines. So, JP, who do we have up first today?
Well, so we're going to have, make sure I got my microphone on here. We're going to have JJ Bradshaw coming on here in just a little while. Our camera was trying to be difficult here. So yeah, we're going to have JJ Bradshaw, and then we're going to have Chris Adamo following him after that. And then one of your buddies, Missouri State Rep Tara Peters, be in the house, talk about some stuff with state issues with Missouri, and also Tom Haviland, who's going to be all over this with the this whole situation with the COVID vaccines. He's been all over this from day one.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be talking about that, his findings, and he's starting to gain traction now. People are actually starting to finally listen to him. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear from him on this issue. So, yeah, I can't wait to get to that one. And also on JJ, he get us an update on some stuff. He's always good about giving us a justice report. The people that you've elected and the people that they hired, our bureaucrats, would have an interest other than the best interest of the people that they serve.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, what we found out that they were willing to sacrifice us for profit, without a doubt, or political power, and that's disturbing to a lot of people. And the unfortunate artifact of that is now it's created a mistrust in government, and so with that, there's and I'm not saying that people should blindly follow anything. I mean, absolutely, just like the Bible says, prove all things. But unfortunately, that reaches so far down that people feel like they can't even trust their local government or their state government. And I'm not saying that they don't have good reason to be suspicious, but folks are getting their information from so many different sources that are unverified. And I'm going to even include our what I call the lamestream press. And I didn't coin that phrase. It was I think it was Lou Dobbs maybe who coined that phrase. But that's actually appropriate. I mean, for CBS, NBC, and ABC, they absolutely they threw out journalism integrity and in favor of the 24-hour news cycle. So in the old days, whenever they would verify sources from at least two different places, unconnected, they just went with whatever rumor and speculation that there might have been out there, and because they felt like they were in competition with the folks in that 24-hour news cycle. Well, then the press became untrustworthy, and folks started reaching for other sources, And unfortunately, the sources that a lot of folks rely on are simply just echo chambers of what it is that they already believe, and that can be bad. So now we're shoving people into silos, and we're only hearing from those voices that we agree with, rather than trying to hear voices from all sides of an issue.
Yeah.
But our democracy was built on, certainly our republic was built on having a multitude of voices talking about it, and then we vote on it, right? And which is the way it is. And then once we vote on it, then we're done with it until we have some other issue we need to either take care of related to that, or try to make an improvement on it. But because we are a democracy, we don't go to war because we lost a vote,
Right.
and that's the only way it can work. And so people have to participate, and we've talked about that on the show a lot.
Yeah.
About how people just aren't participating, and so they run out to their social media accounts and talk to a whole bunch of people that already agree with them, rather than try to challenge those that don't, so that we can have an honest debate on some of this stuff.
And that's a privilege we get, that there's a lot of people across the world that they don't get that privilege.
In fact, it's nowhere.
Yeah.
Even in Western European countries, we think those are democracies. Well, they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, not our style of democracy. We are the only democracy that has this form of government. I mean, they have parliamentary forms of government over there, but they are generally socialist, right? Those governments in Western Europe are socialist governments. But we take for granted that a Western country, a Western European country, would be like us on things like free speech. Well, they're absolutely not. The government over there can pass a law that can classify whatever it is you say as hate speech or whatever, and they can throw you in jail for that. In the United States, at least up till now, they can't. I mean, it has been tried a couple of times here recently, but to show you how fragile our Constitution really is, our form of government, the only thing that strengthens it is if we participate, all of us citizens.
Now we have JJ Bradshaw online. JJ, I want to let you know we are having some audio issues, so hopefully you can still hear us okay, but we're going to push through this. I'm going to keep working on the back end, try to get it fixed, but welcome to the show this morning.
Well, can you hear me?
We can, yep.
All right, I can hear you, and that's the basis of this thing.
That's right.
You mentioned trust in government. Let me go back a few decades. I'm a Vietnam veteran, Mobile Riverine Force, and
River Rat.
Yes, Richard Milhouse Nixon came on network television and said, "We are not now, nor have we ever been in Cambodia." Well, I'm here to tell you, I can read a navigation chart. I could read one fairly well back then. And frankly, our boat has been well into Cambodia, delivering troops and material. That was the first moment that, in my feeble mind, I realized that it was possible to not trust my government. And I haven't trusted my government since. Now, Ronald Reagan, I trusted some. He was one of us. But frankly, the whole procession of bozos that have come since then, got not much trust for them. They lie.
Well, they were
professional liars.
They were former senators or former governors and what have you, right? And
well, we won't lambast you as a result of this, but I have a serious skepticism about government. And you mentioned COVID. I didn't walk in here prepared to talk about that, but I do have a little knowledge about that, and I'll vent my thoughts.
Go ahead.
When Fauci and his minions got on network television and espoused the vaccine as the only way to stop what would be a pandemic of COVID, I was a little skeptical. Number one, I'd never heard of this clown. Number two, the government ginned this thing together in record time.
Yeah.
And government doesn't do very much well, and they do nothing well in a hurry.
Oh, yeah.
The exception to that is the military. Now, they plan ahead. The military has their plans laid in place decades ahead. But the clowns from the CDC and Fauci, no, didn't trust them then, don't trust them now. Well, I volunteered at the hospital, and the hospital required a COVID vaccine, in fact, 2 shots. And I was faced with the untenable task of choosing whether to continue to volunteer or take the jab. I took the jab. My family doctor also took the jab, so he was a true believer in vaccinations. He has since become a skeptic. Now, Fauci and that cabal, in my opinion, should be indicted, should be prosecuted. The falsity that they threw in front of us and expected us to swallow is just unacceptable. And if it's not illegal, it certainly would be immoral. Now, Dave Schultz had a number of people that come on here about the cream-colored slime in the veins and other things, and I don't doubt that those things exist.
Yeah.
But I think those who foisted this upon us ought to be prosecuted. I think there's a price they ought to pay for the betrayal.
Well, I don't see how Fauci isn't guilty of at least conspiracy.
I would think conspiracy at the minimum.
Yeah, and because without his driving the narrative that direction, there's somewhere upwards of about 85,000 people if we use Dr. McCullough's numbers. And I don't know if you remember Dr. McCullough.
I do.
Try to play the clip of him in his Senate hearing back when COVID happened, but he said that 85% of the COVID, quote unquote, COVID related deaths were totally unnecessary, but he had the numbers to back it up. He had the proof, peer reviewed papers, and the whole everything that the other side always demands.
Of course,
the proof. Well, he had all that, and they still ignored him. And then the big concern is that the organizations that were theoretically put in place to protect us, like the CDC and the NIH. Well, come to find out, they were peopled by folks who had ties to the pharmaceutical industry.
All of these folks were pharmaceutical paid off.
I think out of the NIH, out of the five people that were the board members of the NIH, one of them wasn't either a former employee or director of a big pharmaceutical company. And
that is the fox guarding the hen house.
That's the fox guarding the hen house, absolutely. And then CDC wasn't any better. And so the danger there, of course, is that now we can't believe a word they say. I mean, it's the typical boy that cried wolf syndrome.
Well, I'm from Missouri. You've got to show me, and what you have shown me is you're not worthy of my trust. Right. So I won't trust you. Things that come out of government at this point are so twisted and so spun. And Dave is one of those folks that digs out the source, and I'm one of those folks too, because I don't trust the network media. Media has lied to me too many times. So we do dig and find the truth. The trouble is we're just a couple of voices in the wilderness. Thankfully, the followers of this show, most of them are true believers, and they're willing to dig out things as well. Now, sources that I use are Newsmax and sometimes Breitbart, sometimes these others. Now, I do monitor other news sources. You got to have all sides. But if you look at what the network news is doing, the big three, ABC, CBS, NBC, what they're spitting out is 20-second clips of nothing but garbage. And I have a couple of examples. We're going to get away from COVID for a bit.
Well, before we get too far there, I frequently tune into BBC because BBC will have news stories that pertain to us over here in the United States, would be important information. And you don't see a word of it on ABC, NBC, and CBS.
if you're willing, tune in Al Jazeera sometime if you want to hear the Middle Eastern propaganda. They put a spin on our news that is spinning like a top, but it's interesting to hear from them. Now, last night I watched a bit of the network news, and there was, of course, they had some noise about the Iran war. They had some noise about Graham Plattner, and I'm going to speak about him here in a moment. But Mitch McConnell apparently suffered a cardiac event on July the 14th. And the rumors have been flying. Now, on the network news, nada, not a single thing. But here's the issue, as I see it anyway. McConnell might be brain dead. McConnell might be incapacitated in a way that the 25th Amendment would apply were he a president.
Well, I would argue that happened a few years back, but that's just me.
Well, at least his body has been showing up. But the issue here is very serpentine. What happens is this: Governor Beshear, who is a Democrat in Kentucky, if McConnell ends up being declared in some fashion not able to perform his duties,
right?
Years ago, the governor would be able to appoint anyone he wanted to fill that slot temporarily. Okay.
Still that way here in Missouri.
Okay. Kentucky changed the rules in 2024.
Yeah.
And now they have to have a special election unless they run into a time frame. And here's the time frame. August the 3rd is the last date that they could have a special election. Well, why is that important? Because you got a guy named Massey, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who, if a special election would be held, would probably win it. Now, Massey's been a thorn in the side of our friend Donald J. Trump for a good long while. So I heard the other day somebody call this a constitutional crisis. Well, the morons of the world call everything a constitutional crisis.
When it doesn't agree with them, it's
if
a
you've ever read the
crisis.
Constitution, none of this crap is a constitutional crisis. But there's always the talking heads that will howl that.
Right.
Well, why the McConnell thing is important is this. If you remember, we went through years of Joe Biden, who was clearly incapacitated. And our government was the executive branch anyway, was being run by a cabal. We don't know who the hell they are. We can suspect. Right. But all of this happened behind closed doors. Well, couldn't Massey be the same thing? And why wasn't the amendment invoked by the Congress, by his cabinet, to remove him from office and have the vice president step in? That's what that little piece of Constitution was about. Well, yeah. Look at the folks that surrounded him in his cabinet, all hardcore Obama Democrats. Right. If the guy was dead and being poked up on a stick like a puppet, they would still not have invoked that amendment.
It was weekend at Bernie's at the White House.
So, weekend at Bernie. And frankly, McConnell may be one of those as well. Now, what that tells me is that our government has become sufficiently corrupt that they're not willing to do the right thing, which is put somebody that's conscious and cognizant in that position. And the politics of it be damned. Well, apparently the politics is the important part in this.
Well, how many times have we seen that, JJ? With senators. I mean, there was Byrd and Thurman and
Maxine Waters.
Who's the lady from California?
Dianne Feinstein.
Oh yeah. My goodness! You talk about the most egregious one. I mean, she had to be led into the chamber whenever there was something to do there, and I'm guessing that somebody had to raise her hand or push her button or something for her. It was terrible.
For about 7 months, Dianne Feinstein would not get in front of a microphone. Anytime somebody shoved one in her face, she just had a blank look. The reason is the woman had become a babbling idiot. She couldn't put 6 words together and turn it into a sentence, much less a paragraph.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she was the same one that you remember. I'm pretty sure she was the one that had the Chinese spy as her driver of her car.
that was her driver. Yes.
Yeah,
And speaking of Mitch McConnell, let's talk about his Oriental wife for a moment, who left the country 3 days after his cardiac event. Now, one could argue that she probably has his power of attorney, and she is the one that could declare him incompetent, and she's sitting in China. Makes you wonder what kind of connection there is here, what kind of backroom deals have been done over the years. Uh, I don't trust these folks. Don't trust them any
well,
further than I could
well,
throw
you
them.
remember the crazy stuff we did here in Missouri when, unfortunately, our former governor Carnahan and unfortunately died in an airplane crash prior to the Senate election, and so
We elected
they
Gene.
we elected Jean, and she wasn't on the ballot.
Yes.
I mean, you talk about crazy stuff.
This
Um,
was the same thing that they did with Kamala. So there is
yeah,
a track record here.
right.
But my goodness, it's a dirty and disgusting track record. I claim to be a patriot. I claim to believe in the Constitution and will defend it. But these folks clearly do not run by those same rules.
Yeah.
Now, was Jean incompetent? Not particularly. I know the Carnahans, and she did an adequate
Oh,
job.
oh no,
Uh,
but it was a job she never wanted. I mean, obviously she didn't want that job,
it
but
was thrust upon her.
it was thrust upon
Well,
her, but only under the guise of what was it that Gore said? There's no controlling legal authority, right? I mean,
right.
but anybody in their right mind would say, okay, we're going to have a special election,
Yes,
right?
shouldn't we have an election?
Yeah,
Shouldn't people be allowed to speak? Now, the
right.
clowns that they put up to be candidates in that election are probably just as dirty as the ones that left. But
Oh,
at least we
right,
have a choice.
right.
At least we have the opportunity to elect the least objectionable of these
But I
folks.
mean, if we were going to make it up as we went along, right? We wouldn't choose a person who was never on the ballot. I
Yeah,
mean,
how about that?
obviously the Republicans would object, right, to a special
Yeah,
election.
this
But
smelled really bad.
if you were, I mean, like I said, if you're just going to make it up as you go along, well, why not suggest and then let the people decide when you have two viable candidates? I mean,
Yes,
um,
actually, if you wrote this stuff in a novel, nobody would buy it
oh,
because
they
they
would
wouldn't
say that's
believe.
crazy. That'll never happen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah,
We're on the same page in that regard.
yeah.
The outrageous things that our elected representatives get away with,
Hmm.
and nobody calls them on them. Well, maybe
Hmm.
me and Dave and you, but our voices get stifled in the
Well,
trample.
that's in fact what I'm famous for up in the Capitol is asking direct questions and expecting a direct answer. And frequently I didn't. I mean, they would dance around the subject, but I would press on until we got the answer, at least the one we were looking for.
Well,
Um,
at least some answer.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean, sometimes just trying to get them on the record for things. That's one of the big ones that come to mind is the director of MoDOT, for the folks out there, what's what we call our Department of Transportation, and and this was related to something that got slid into the Constitution, our Missouri Constitution, years ago,
mhm.
that basically said that they stand appropriated without any legislative action. Well, I mean, that flies in the face of the original intent of the Constitution, separation of powers and what have you. But
Hey,
the people, quote unquote, voted for it. All right. Well, so they were over for budget hearings, and so they actually sued the people of the state of Missouri. A department of the state of Missouri sued the people of the state of Missouri in order to confirm that they are in complete control of their money. And so on an example of what you're talking about a government out of control. And so when I pressed the director on why he would even show up at a budget hearing, because essentially they're the fourth branch of government, And he basically said, well, it's just tradition, and we want to keep you guys informed of what we're doing
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
our money. Right?
Certainly not asking permission.
Right.
Not
And so I
forgiveness.
suggested to him that it wasn't MoDOT's money.
Mhm.
No matter what, it's not MoDOT's money, right? Still the people's money. And but unfortunately, like I said, we had a Supreme Court judges that agreed with them, and I'm not saying that they weren't probably legally correct, but what I'm suggesting is that when folks voted for that, they really don't know the difference between the word appropriation and the word allocation.
Mhm.
Where appropriation is an actual function of your government to maintain control of the purse strings.
Mhm.
Allocation is how that money is divided up between the
Yes. And-
various things that you want to spend it on.
And that difference is not subtle.
Yeah, that's right. And
That
so
difference is not-
but that's an example of what we deal with, and what you're pointing out every day is that, we got slick talking lawyers and bureaucrats who know how to manipulate the language in order to convince you that, oh well, that's what it is, that's the way it's written. The worst, most egregious case, and I'd love for you to chat about that for a moment, is the most recent one about birthright citizenship. I mean,
yeah.
clearly, the people who were the authors of that had no intent of allowing anybody who just happened to show up on vacation and have a baby, and that baby turns into a citizen of the United States.
Yes, that particular little bit of prose in the Constitution, it hinges on and subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that's what the Supremes were going to be deciding upon. That's the obvious part. But, that amendment was to make the children of slaves citizens of this country. Right. This was never intended. I'm sure that the founders never had a clue that this could be misused in this fashion. And had they had a clue, they would have written it differently. And subject to the jurisdiction thereof, if your loyalty is to China, are you subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? I would argue no. So there would be no birthright citizenship.
Well, Mark Levin had a very good analysis of that, and I encourage people to go look that up. But he says that the authors, and he read their words, the authors of the amendment, and they were talking about when you subject to the jurisdiction means completely subject to the jurisdiction. You pay taxes, you live here. That's what subject to the jurisdiction means. So how can the Supreme Court ignore the actual words of the people who wrote the amendment?
The Supreme's got it wrong.
In favor of, what was it, English common law about the king has jurisdiction over everyone, no matter where they're from, and some kind of crazy thing like that.
Yeah, we had a revolution over that.
Yeah. I mean, we have one Supreme Court justice right now who refers to Spider-Man comics for her legal opinion.
I'm so sorry, but that woman is just so far off.
Right.
How in the world did we ever get this moron on the Supreme Court?
Well, the auto pen, obviously.
There is maybe a little bright spot in this. One of our Supreme Court justices suggested that there's a way to get around this without a constitutional amendment. And I read about that, and he's darn sure right.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Yeah.
If our know nothing, do nothing legislature could manage to write a few lines of law that made sense, it pretty much says if you come here briefly to have a child, it's not a citizen, or words to that effect. Easy peasy. Trouble is, our Congress isn't going to do that. They're at a stalemate. When you only have a 1 or 2 or 3 person majority, you're not going to get anything done. Let's talk about the SAVE Act for a moment. This thing is so obvious. And we've got 86% of the voting people in this country that are for that legislation, and we can't get it through the Senate.
Well, I mean, there's still at least one option also available to the president. He just refuses any visas from China. I mean, that, and of course, the people's hair is going to catch on fire. But it's like, okay, well, I mean, this is the only option we've got left. So you guys figure it out. And so when Congress throws a fit over it, it's like, well, guess what? I'm in charge of that department, and I say no more visas issued to anyone coming from China or any of these other countries that do this birth tourism kind of a thing.
That occurred with individuals from India as well. China and India are the top two.
Right.
This can be taken care of. The trouble is, our legislature is who should be taking care of this.
100%.
And they are not. And even if they manage to get something to barely pass in the House of Representatives, it would never fly in the Senate.
Correct.
If you look at the way this country was set up back in the day, the legislatures in the House of Representatives were considered to be rabble. They were considered to be troublemakers, elected by a few folks in some little town somewhere. And the senators were considered to be the wise, gradually grind along and argue these things out and come up with the right decision. Well, we're not even close to that anymore.
No.
Now we have nothing but partisanship. The facts be damned. And whatever the House of Representatives sends to the Senate, if it's a Republican House, which it is, not going to get through the Senate. We have degenerated into this. The finger pointing continues to go, and the legislating does not.
Well, I would add one little twist to that. It's less partisanship and more lobbyistship. That's I said that was with a P, by the way, SHIP.
It's a serious shame that lobbyists are allowed into elected representatives.
I mean, it is quasi First Amendment stuff, but if folks really understood how much influence that a little bit of money bears on their government, they would probably be disgusted. Well, they already are, by the way. But the worst thing that ever happened to our Constitution, as best as I can tell, because it caused all of these problems, or a lot of these problems going downstream, was the 17th Amendment, where we changed to popularly elected senators.
Yes.
And you think about it now today, if the Senate was elected the way it was intended to be with the original Constitution, then a lot of our troubles that we're having right now would not exist.
Yes.
Now that I understand that people have a tendency to say, "Oh no, I need to have my voice on that." Well, you would have your voice on that through your legislature, and who's closer to the fire, right? I'd much rather have a legislator making that decision, because it's someone I can reach out and touch. I can go to Jeff City and I can go talk to my legislator and complain about his choice or her choice for senator. But that senator, once he gets to Washington, D.C., that's 6 years, right, of untouchableness.
Absolutely.
And so we've seen the result of that. I mean, we're $38 trillion in debt because of that decision.
Let me give you a bit of theory that Dave and I have talked about for decades. Yeah. And he finally agreed that I was right about this. It doesn't happen very often. But local elections, your local election, your kids go to school with their kids. You go to the same church. You get to the county size. Yeah, you might know those folks some. You get to the state, you're less connected to those elected representatives. And by the time you get to the federal government, you're not connected to them at all. Now, I call the Capitol switchboard. I write letters. I send emails. I'm one of those noisy people that won't go away. But my voice is one in millions at the federal level, and it never gets heard. What happens is the staffer takes the phone call. He checks a box on a spreadsheet. Okay, this guy's a right-wing nut. Let's check that column. And ultimately, the legislator, he doesn't see any of that stuff. What he does see is lobbyists in his office every day. He does see the fancy dinners and the other perks And an individual like me can't provide that, but the
Mhm.
lobbyists certainly do. So, yeah, 17th Amendment, I think, was a serious mistake. I know why they did it, but I think in the end, that's proved to be wrong.
Well, it's so as with all politics, it waxes and it wanes. But there was a formula that was created. This formula doesn't exist anywhere in the world. JP and I were talking about this earlier. The no Western government has this style of democracy, this style of republic. The three branches of government that doesn't exist anywhere else
No.
in the world. We have this is very unique. And when you read the Federalist Papers on how we ended up where we're at, the folks like Hamilton and Adams and the name escapes me now, but their whole purpose here was to create an adversarial relationship between the three branches of government to keep a check and a balance on those three branches.
That's absolutely right. And that was well designed, beautifully
Yes.
designed.
And so that part that affected that formula, the 17th Amendment, there was a method to the madness there. That the people needed to be represented directly in Congress, and so we had the House of Representatives. And the people had enormous power because that person had to be reelected every 2 years.
Yeah.
But because we recognize that what a democracy is where 51% of the people make 49% pay for everything, they understood that there needed to be a check on that power. And that power was the states themselves.
Yeah.
And so with the states, choosing that senator, put that balance in the system, that check and balance into the system in the legislature. Because the legislature back in those days, well, once again, original intent of the Constitution was then the people had the power. And our legislature, are not just at the federal level, but at the state level, keeps giving up more power to the executive branch.
Yes.
And so now the most powerful entity in the country is the executive branch, second only to, if you will, the Supreme Court. The only thing that keeps the Supreme Court from being the most powerful branch of government is that they currently have to wait until something gets to their desk, where the president and the executive branch can, basically by fiat, just wake up one morning and write an executive order.
Nature abhors a vacuum. And we have a vacuum in the legislative branch. They have not managed to get much done. And
what I say is that they're kind of all in on it, right? There's this big, huge river of money that flows out of Washington, D.C., and if all they got to do is stick their grubby little fingers in it, and they get, their fair share. So they're not going to do anything that messes with the status quo. What occasionally, every once in a while, we will elect some, and I think right now we have a reasonably good contingent from the state of Missouri up there, but many of them haven't been there very long either, right? But that's the little boy trying to stick his finger in the hole in the dike, right?
The sad part about this is the young buck legislators that come in there full of spit, fire, and vinegar don't get on the committees that have the power. They don't have the staying power in there that the long-term legislators do. And the long-term legislators, let's face it, are pretty corrupt. They've been bought and paid for. JP, you look like you're just itching to get on that microphone.
Well, I wanted to thank you for your time, JJ. We have our next guest is 8:40. But thank you for always being the leadoff for the show. And of course, Dave will be back hosting next week. But as always, JJ Bradshaw with his what we call the JJ Justice Report. JJ, thank you so much. And of course, we'll plan to see you again next Friday.
I enjoyed it, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
All right. So next we've got Chris Adamo, who is the author of a very important book called Rules for Defeating Radicals. Chris, did want to let you know we're having some audio issues this morning. We can still hear each other. We're on backup microphones, so it's going to sound a little different, maybe a little muffled, but so far, so good. I just wanted to give you that heads up on that. But welcome to the show, Chris Adamo.
Thank you so much, JP. And I guess maybe I'm a little relieved to find out that at least this week I'm not the problem with the audio or video. So
no, you're
that's
good.
An improvement.
No, it only happens when I'm around. Chris, so it's,
I did send you, JP, if you check your text, I did send you something I'd ask you guys to consider posting. Last week, the pastor of Grace Calvary Chapel in St. Joseph, Missouri, gave just an outstanding discussion of America's 250th birthday, the role of Christians in modern society, as you know, as we're told we're supposed to just sit inside the walls of our churches. And he explained our real responsibility as Christians, and he gave the most outstanding explanation of the attacks on they accuse us of Christian nationalism. He dealt with that just fantastically, and I'm trying to get people to watch this. It really needs to go nationwide because we let them put us on defense with things like this, and what we need is the right answers. We can explain the real facts, and so if you guys would consider looking into that, it's on your text messages there, JP. And,
okay, we'll look into that and look to get that posted.
Yeah,
great.
Well, that's that. Of course, what we've been talking about, Chris, is of course COVID and basically the response to COVID. A lot of it, but which dovetails right in what you're talking about, right in with conversation that we had earlier, which this all kind of fits together, right? You're on your book, which is a play on the words of the book that we're all familiar with, also called Rules for Radicals,
right?
And about how things get distorted and how you can use that to your benefit is. In a political situation, and the old joke, and I can't remember the exact words, but it basically goes like this: is that just tell a story about your opponent. It doesn't even have to be true. Then your opponent spends all his time trying to defend himself over something that's not true, and guess what? That becomes the narrative, right?
That is absolutely it.
I'm reminded of the former Supreme Court judge that was running for Senate in Alabama. They accused him of being a child molester and with no proof, never, wasn't indicted, had one person's, comment about something that had happened 30 years before that. And so now when you ask somebody, it kind of works like this. Well, what was that guy from Alabama that was running for Senate, the child molester?
Exactly.
When he was never convicted of a crime of any kind, or
they create
or
a label. I actually
yeah.
devote an entire chapter to labels.
Yeah.
Because what they do is in every situation. And by the way, the subtitle, since you mentioned my book, it's a play off of Alinsky. The subtitle is Countering the Alinsky Strategy in Politics and Culture.
Yeah.
And this is crucial. We've got to do it in both arenas, because if you only do it in one area, they're going to come in through the back door in the other. So we've got to deal with them in the culture and in the political arena. And frankly, we've been doing a lousy job of it because of the very thing you said, that we play a defensive game. They come up with the most absurd accusation, and we're supposed to disprove it or else. And just, I'm going to accuse you. You're actually a space alien.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do you disprove that? How do you, if you spend all your time trying to disprove that, well, what are the real issues that we should be talking about? Well, we can't get to that because you're a space alien. And they literally come up with these kinds of absurdities and put them against us, the child molester thing and stuff like that. Meanwhile, let's talk about a huge crime going on against the entire country, and let's look at how they handle it. Okay, we have been for several decades, and I appreciate when you're talking to JJ, and you guys are saying both parties, the corruption is on both sides. This is a nonpartisan issue of corruption, a bipartisan issue of corruption. Okay, they've been facilitating the invasion of our nation by often hostile, military-aged male foreigners. Okay, now, in the beginning, they were illegal invaders. Okay, now the left morphed that. They were, illegal aliens. Okay, then they became undocumented aliens. Then they became undocumented immigrants. Then they just became immigrants. Now, if you listen, the term is migrants. And the whole time that they change these terms, they make them sound ever more benign. The entire time that they're doing that, our side adopts a new term. Now let's look at the reality. The reality is we have tens of millions of illegal invaders, and they're now called migrants, which means travelers. Okay, so it's this totally sanitized term,
Right.
and we allow that when we're given news reports and whatever, we allow that to be the title because that's what they dictated that they want to be.
Well, and so excellent point, and I recognized that a while back, and that we got to quit using their language.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not. It's crazy for us to because that's part of the brainwashing, right?
It's part of the setting the stage,
yeah,
so that you're in a defensive mode.
Right. So we adopt their language, and then we give that's tacit approval of what it is that they're saying, and so I was put in Facebook jail for saying illegal immigrant, and so I pointed out that is actually what the statute says, right? That's
You were put in
statute,
Facebook jail
illegal,
for telling the truth.
Yeah, right. And so but because Facebook, and I was then, it still is actually, Zuckerberg he's one of these weather vanes, right? He understands that, you go with the wind kind of a thing, you don't go against it. And at the time he was getting paid lots of money to do the bidding of the administration.
Well, and he's a leftist. Okay. I mean,
basically he's a leftist. Absolutely. Right. And he's not, he wouldn't be considered a conservative Republican in any place, but so he backed off on that now. But how quick will he go right back to that?
And that's
as soon
key.
as a Democrat gets elected to president. So we're definitely in a situation where we and I'm not saying unnecessarily. I'm saying necessarily so. We have to be suspicious of our government, and I think that was always intended, right?
There's no doubt about that. The First Amendment was not made so that male strippers could go into children's classrooms. The First Amendment was made so that we don't have to say whoever's in that White House, he's untouchable. We can criticize him. Okay. The problem is that there's multiple ways of silencing you.
Right.
And if we allow them to tell us that we have to color inside the lines, we accept that, and then they tell us where those lines are at while they run rampant. Guess who dominates the discourse?
Well, you'll remember back during COVID, how quickly we would accept one of the foundational statements in the First Amendment. We gave up willingly, in some cases, our right to practice our religion.
Excellent point.
Freedom. And how quick people just did that, just accepted it, basically because the government told them, oh, well, you have to be scared, you must be fearful.
That makes you a good citizen. And here's one of the things that they do. Again, one of the manipulations is that whenever they're doing something, they present it as virtue.
Yeah.
And I've coined a term now that I think you can see where it applies throughout history. I call it toxic virtue. There's a couple of really good books out, by the way. There's one by a guy named, I might pronounce it wrong. It looks like it's Gad Sad, and he's a new, properly arrived American immigrant who loves America, and his is called, it's called Toxic Empathy, and it talks about the fact that we. Or I might be mixing up names here. I have to go back and I'll double check this. But anyway, he wrote a book on the idea. Oh no, his is Suicidal Empathy. I'm sorry, I got that right. Suicidal Empathy, and excellent book. And he's talking about the fact that you try to be compassionate with a murderer, and all that's going to happen is somebody's going to get killed. Okay, whereas you have to come to a point of saying this guy's a threat. If he's a threat to my family, and I'm compassionate, nice to him, I'm collaborating in the murder. Okay.
So So I actually like your term toxic empathy. I mean,
That's Gad Saad who said that. That's his book. Okay.
yeah. So that toxic empathy, I
Oh
mean,
no.
that applies to exactly what we're talking about when we talk about Medicaid. Now, so there certainly was a need for Medicaid back when it was first created. It was, age blinded disabled people couldn't get health insurance. There was just it was too expensive, even if it was available. And so Medicaid ostensibly was created to fill that gap. Well, then we extended that in every direction you can think of to now we have what's called Medicaid expansion. What Medicaid expansion is Medicaid for able-bodied people. So to give
In
you
other
one,
words, socialized medicine.
socialized medicine.
Yeah.
But
It's just a backdoor approach.
So what we have now in Missouri is 368,000 mostly young people on Medicaid expansion. Now, I don't know where it is everywhere else, but I can walk down the street here in the local town of Rolla and I'm finding help wanted signs everywhere.
Yep.
But unfortunately, what we've done is we've provide their health care, they get food stamps, and they even get a TANF card with about $300 on it every month, even though they're mostly these 26-year-olds sleeping in the basement of their mom and dad's house playing first-person shooter games all day.
And that's an absolutely accurate way of describing it. I do want to correct the record just so I want to stay on facts. The book Toxic Empathy was by Allie Beth Stuckey. She's an outstanding Christian lady who gets up and speaks on these things. She shows a kind of spine that too few men out there actually show in confronting the issues. And then the suicidal empathy was Gad Saad. Okay, I just want to correct that.
Okay, good. Now, thank you.
Having done that,
and so when we talk about that toxic empathy, we see that the healthcare outcomes for that cohort, I mean, we're talking young people who would normally be working, but they're sitting around playing first-person shooter games. The incidence of diabetes is going through the roof with those people. And so that's why I love that term, toxic empathy. That's exactly what it is. Oh, we feel so sorry for them. We're going to give them this program so that they get sicker. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Well,
but
it does.
But what influenced that was the amount of money that's in that. 40% of our state budget right now is Medicaid alone. And
it does make sense from a perspective of how do we overload and topple the system. You remember the Cloward-Piven strategy of Marxism. Right. You overload the system, it collapses, and then you ride in as the hero to pick up the pieces. Hey, everybody, and this is Marxism from the beginning. You create a mess, and then you ride in as the fix-it man. Now all you have to do is forfeit your rights and your freedoms to me, and just do as I say, and I'll create utopia for you. And then they come in, and now you have your dictator. But by the time people realize they've been lied to, now it's too late. Oh, we got your guns, we got your rights, we have control of the media, we have control of the schools. No, you don't have any more rights. And if you try to assert rights, we're just going to shoot you in the streets. This is how Marxism comes in. Well, what you're describing there in Missouri, now they call it a bellwether state because it can go either way in the major elections, but that's because you have two huge deep blue zones in Kansas City and St. Louis, and the whole rest of the state is just as red as any place in heartland America. But if we can get 51% out of those two blue zones, then all of a sudden the rest of the state doesn't have a voice.
Does not have a voice. And so we've got an Amendment 4 that's coming up in this next election, and that tries to correct that. There's been a lot of noise out there, mostly from the side that really wants it to stay the way it is, so they can shove whatever crazy thing they can down our throat.
Absolutely, it's the old mob rule democracy where 51% of the voters can vote to trample the rights of the other 49% at any given moment. So you have an amendment on the ballot, and at the last minute, millions of dollars of Soros money comes in, does these very well planned, very elaborate ads and slick mailings on one side of the issue, and the average citizen who's kind of sitting there going about his business, he looks at these and he says, "Oh, this sounds scary. What those evil people are trying to do. I've got to vote according to this." And this amendment passes. The just venomous pro-abortion amendment this last time, we had ads about civil rights. We
Mhm.
had all sorts of ads about, I mean, it was all emotionalism, it was all lies, and it passed with 51%, 52% of the vote.
The marijuana amendment here in Missouri is 43 pages of lawyer gobbledygook that basically created a monopoly for four big marijuana companies that aren't even in Missouri. They, they focus on the gummies and the edible stuff. They didn't care about the smoking marijuana at all. But basically, the way that it was written was a specification that only they could meet, and so all buried in that 43 pages. A lot of folks don't know that got rid of all marijuana law.
And it blows the doors open, and
Yeah.
next thing you know, you have more addiction. And you mentioned those diabetic kids in mommy's basement.
Yeah.
Then there's addiction there, and then a lot of them wander out in the streets, and you have homeless. And again, how do we feel about the homeless? Well, we feel compassion. I don't want to see somebody living on the street,
Right.
but you don't fix a spiritual problem with material assets thrown at them.
So, where your earlier point on the elections and voting, 22% of the electorate hung that millstone around our neck, and the voter turnout was atrocious in the rural areas. The urban areas you were talking about, 70% voter turnout to go vote for that thing, and my home county only had a 38% voter turnout in that election. And
that, I'll tell you something, that is really, it's a real sad statement, but it's also there is the silver lining if we will ever seize it.
Yeah.
And I go back to my Alinsky strategy, my book on countering the Alinsky strategy, is the fact that the Alinsky strategy only works when we allow it. Thank you, JP.
Yeah.
And if we would just grasp this one fact, that they only get away with this stuff. Now it'll hit a turning point where they've taken your guns, they've silenced you, and now they're in total control. You see that in North Korea and China. They will push it to that point. You see Mamdani trying to push it that way in every sense in New York. But at our current juncture right now, we could turn this completely around. I'm talking to my fellow Christians out there.
Yeah.
If we stand up in every Bible study, in every church, we stand up and say, it's up to us to stop this onslaught against our children. Right. It's up to us to show up, as you just said, is to show up at the voting booth and actually vote for the right person, or vote against or for these amendments as they come out based on what they're really about. Now, that also takes a certain amount of effort on my part to find out what's the truth. Because the ads, I'm going to get emotionalism. Okay. If we, the people, I can go back to 2 Chronicles 7:14. God said, if my people, okay, if we, the people, will simply stand against the evil and stand for what's right, including learning the issues and going to the voting, to the ballot box to take a stand on these things, we're still in a place where we can massively turn these things around.
Oh, yeah. So all political advertising isn't about trying to convince you to vote for me. It's about convincing you that your guy doesn't have a chance, or your issue doesn't have a chance, so there's no sense in you showing up. And it works.
It works.
And so people tell me all the time, well, I don't go vote because my vote doesn't matter. And I say, you know how I know for sure your vote doesn't matter? Is when you don't vote. And so I tell people all the time, the difference between John McCain winning Missouri and Barack Obama winning Missouri, our 8 electoral votes, was 3.3 votes per precinct. Now tell me your vote doesn't matter.
So they convinced 4 people per precinct to stay at home, and Barack Obama wins.
Right.
And guess what? You staying at home, that's what you stand for.
Yeah.
Every time you see Barack Obama, that's what you stand for.
Yeah. It's the old present button. We have a button on our desk in the legislature that's marked present, right? There's yes, no, and present. Okay. So people think pressing that button of present means that they are not expressing an opinion one way or the other about it, when in actuality, a present button counts as a no. So you're actually voting no when you do that. And my opinion is that, and they sent me up to the Capitol, to push either red or green, one or the other.
Yeah, and I would say that, and I could give a percentage here. I'd say 90% of the time, hidden present, it should say coward. It should say, I'm a coward. I won't take a stand on this. You know,
Hey,
there may be some
now,
oddball issues where you just don't know what the right decision is, but you know, we go through the trouble to put people in there so they do learn about these issues and know the right answer.
Well, it's not always that. I mean, obviously there are some people who are, you know, that ethically they can't vote for something
and I get
because it affects them personally, right? You know, if I'm voting on a budget bill that, you know, that had $10 million for you know, contracts for companies like mine, well, that means I'm voting for, you know, to get, you know, government money. So somebody who votes no on an issue like that, or present, I mean, on an issue like that, well, I'm okay with that, right?
Yeah, and I get that, unless you're a Democrat, in which case you don't have to worry about conflict of interest because they won't call you out on it.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely. Same is true in Jefferson City on that, calling them out when they're on their hypocrisy.
Which is another one of the things where we have ceded the ground.
Yeah.
Because again, every single issue, the way I describe it is that they claw their way onto this phony moral high ground. And so when they never present an issue and say, here's what's really going on, they say, here's the righteous, virtuous thing to do. And you're either a bigot or you hate children or you're a greedy capitalist or something. And again, this stuff only works when we allow it, because when you confront it, you confront the actual issues and bring them back down to what the real basics of the case are about. It is very cut and dry, overwhelmingly. You know, the open borders. Should we allow illegal invaders in? No. The Supreme Court just passed this atrocious birthright citizenship thing a few weeks ago, which, by the way, Trump is looking to revisit that because it's such an abomination to the Constitution. You know, if Japanese pilots, while they're bombing Pearl Harbor, if they dropped off a pregnant woman on the shores of Oahu, then the baby makes her an American citizen or something. I mean, you know, it's idiocy, but. And I go back to what you just said, a lot of corruption, a lot of people being bought off, including the United States Supreme Court. They're agenda driven. So, you know, if we bring the issues back to their reality, which is, should we allow foreign invaders to come into our country and destroy us just because some of them are procreating while they're at it? The answer is no. Okay.
So I call it, you know, John Roberts is one of those umpires that does the makeup call, right? He made a bad call in one area, so he makes up for it by making another bad call somewhere else to in his mind, even it out. Well, you know, umpires and referees, that defeats their entire purpose because they're affecting the outcome.
Yep.
And we always say all the time, I coached travel softball for years and you know, in high school, fast pitch softball, and we all have to play with the same umpires. And so just make the call the same way. You know, if you make a bad call,
their job.
Don't try to make it up later on. It seems to be his problem. He wants to be a people pleaser. And
I think it's actually much, much worse than that, much more insidious than that, because from the day that he invented Obamacare as a constitutional right, it was obvious that somebody had gotten him. He had a really good record of saying, is it constitutional? Yes or no. All of a sudden on that day, he completely flipped. He did it in a situation that fundamentally changed. Remember Obama fundamentally changing America? He fundamentally changed the concept of government provided benefits, with all of a sudden we have nationalized health care, which has been a dumpster fire ever since, including what you're describing for the young people in Missouri. He was the pivotal point on that flipped it in the favor of the socialists. Now,
so you remember, of course, what that turned on was whether or not it was a tax. And so if it was a tax, then that was strictly in the purview of not a direct tax um, under the legislature. But because of the way the language said, the language said this is not a tax, right, for that exact purpose. And so what he did was he rewrote the legislation. Now we can refer back to other cases unrelated to that, where the Supreme Court said, "Look, you got the language wrong. We're going to tell the legislature to go change the language." But he bypassed that step because he knew that if it went back to now a Republican controlled legislature, it would never pass. So he had to change the language in the statute, which is clearly not the Supreme Court's job.
Absolutely.
So he violated precedent. He violated legal standard. He
violated the
everything.
Constitution. Let's
violated
just say
the Constitution 100% because it's not their job to legislate. And
so he did this at the bidding of somebody or something, because this is, again, a total abandonment of what he had been. But from that point forward, at crucial moments, John Roberts can always be counted on to do the bidding of the left. Now, at the time, I'm going to tell you, and this sounds like it's getting off into conspiracy theory, but something happened. And at the time, I figured, well, they must have come into his office and said, "Look, we have these records of you looking at kiddie porn, okay? And we're going to show these to the public unless you vote the way we want you to from now on." And again, that's conjecture on my part, but it was something along those lines that from that point forward, the left owned him. And at some crucial junctures, it's like, well, he might try and sound like he's not so extreme sitting the fence, but when push comes to shove, and it's a matter of advancing the leftist agenda or shutting it down, he sides with the left. And this last decision, which any ninth grade civics teacher that had actually had an intent on what's the Constitution about, the 14th Amendment was about one thing. It was about granting citizenship to slaves who had been brought here, had been forced under the jurisdiction of the United States against their will, and had given birth to children. They and their children were granted citizenship. The 14th Amendment actually, if the writers of it, if they had known what it was going to get turned into, they would have sunsetted it on the day the very last slave gave birth to a child. Okay.
So that's not speculation. The authors of the 14th Amendment said what you just said. Mark Levin had a very good analysis of that, and he went through the entire thing about subject to jurisdiction and all of that. And it was clear from the words out of the mouths of the people who wrote it and voted on it that what this was about was the children of slaves, period, exclamation point.
Yep, that's it.
And so rushing back to, as we talked about in the earlier segment, under the command of the king or whatever, under English common law. Well, English common law certainly applies. We've based a lot of our law on that, but not in an amendment to our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't have anything to do with English common law, especially the 14th Amendment. So the reality was what you had just pointed out. They had to distort the actual meaning in order to get to what they wanted to do. I think Justice Roberts, so the first thing I observed about Justice Roberts, and I've never been able to figure this one out, but how do you go from a newly appointed justice to being Chief Justice? How do you get appointed to be the Chief Justice? Why wasn't Alito or one of those elevated to Chief Justice and then Roberts would have just been a regular justice? Is it so no one's explained to me what that dynamic is. Is it simply because the Chief Justice retires or whatever, then the next guy in gets that job? That's ridiculous. Who would ever come up with an idea like that?
And I can't explain that. All I can tell you is that he wasn't doing too bad. I remember him in the hearings saying simply, well, how are you going to decide on this case or that one? Are you going to side with this person? Are you going to side with that one? And he said, look, the cold hard fact is that it's going to come down to, is person A aligned with the Constitution or not? Because if they are, I'll stand with them. If they're not, I'm not going to stand with them. And he was very blunt about that. And that's the way he behaved until that Obamacare decision. And from that point, it totally collapsed. And again, I have no idea specifically what has gone on, but I am absolutely convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt that somebody is holding something over him, because he's supposed to be about upholding the Constitution, and he's not anymore, not in the least sense.
Well, he raised justice's blindfold, right? So
Yeah,
that's
and
that's
he's
essentially what it is.
and he's looking to the left when he does it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that sad. And again, the Supreme Court, this is an area where, as conservatives, we have really dropped the ball, because the Supreme Court now is presumed to be, if you're pro-Constitution, then that's the conservatives. If you're anti-Constitution, you're all for trashing the Constitution, then that's what liberals are about. So they can put in these Constitution trashing so-called justices, and we counter that with those who are upholding the Constitution. And you know what they call that? They call that balance. Literally, leftists get out there and say we need a balanced Supreme Court. Balance between what? Balance between upholding the Constitution or trashing it. That's a partisan issue now. Now, if we on the Republican side, if we had the spine and the willingness to confront the backlash and say, okay, if this is a partisan issue, then what you're saying is the Democrat Party is anti-American, because that's what you just said with your assessment of what kind of justices we need on the court. Okay, if we had the spine to do that and to carry that forth to the American people, we'd be in a much stronger position nationwide to confront these leftist onslaughts. But we don't do that. It's, well, we want it balanced between them and us, and okay, they have their people, we have ours. No, that's not the case. We have a literal movement afoot that's out to destroy America. Again, we look at Mamdani, we look at Gavin Newsom. These are the extreme cases, but then look at the people that are following them. Look at the people that support them.
Well, it's I mean, your analysis on they absolutely hate the Constitution, because
they're unfit for the court at that point.
Yeah, the Constitution is what's getting in the way of the control that they seek over the American people.
And that's why the Constitution was written, by the way.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, and you can see that. You can see that in all the writings of the authors of the Constitution, but also all the folks who participated in the Federalist Papers.
Yep.
That was clear that the ultimate authority would be the people, but we understood that. I mean, they looked back in history and saw that all the true democracies, they failed miserably.
51% hit a point one day where they say trample the rights of the other 49%. It's over.
And so then the idea of the republic, but the construction of the republic was more like what we see in parliamentarian democracies, and so they didn't last very long. They lasted longer than the true democracies, and so that's the reason why the three branches of government and the structure there. And look what's happened. Europe claims to be. France claims to be a country for 400 years and all that kind of stuff, but they haven't held the same type of government in those 400 years. They went from monarchies, feudalism, monarchies, and little kingdoms all over the place, fiefdoms, and then two or three different versions of socialism, and so, which is honestly where they're at right now. And so, I probably should include they were under Hitler's control for a little while too there, but none of them have had the same style of government for 250 years ever.
Right.
And at this point,
I'll be honest with you. At this point, there's a couple of things going on. Number one, America is largely existing on the momentum of what the founders did, because as we've been discussing for the last several minutes, is they're not abiding by those principles, and that's going to come unhinged unless we stand against it. The other thing is that the founders had the wherewithal to implement the Second Amendment, which the Second Amendment puts teeth to the First Amendment.
Right.
Okay, and it's just that simple. What did Obama do from the minute he got in? What was he all about? He was about, you remember Fast and Furious, throwing guns across the border, having them come back in. Obama was about getting rid of the Second Amendment. If you look at where we are, the things that happened, the lockdowns and stuff in COVID, just try to imagine where we would have been with all these things if they hadn't gotten our guns, or if they had gotten our guns.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And so at this point, the goal is still to figure out how to get us to a place where we are defenseless so they can continue advancing this.
yeah, so Stalin, Hitler,
Yeah.
name your despot.
And that may sound apocalyptic, but if you consider going back to 2020, that's not that many years ago, you consider the fact that the government declared churches non-essential.
Right.
The abortion clinics stayed open, the tattoo parlors, the marijuana dispensaries, they stayed open, but churches were
bars.
declared non-essential and
bars,
basically made illegal.
Yeah. So, what Reagan said that, freedom is just one generation from extinction. And,
Always.
and so he's right. I mean, if a poll, can't recite it, but it stuck in my head, that 56% of kids under 30 think communism is an acceptable form of government. And but those are keep in mind, those are folks who have no memory of the Soviet Union.
Yep, and let's be totally frank about it. Those are the same ones you're talking about in mommy's basement with the Game Boys.
Yeah,
and they go. This again, I'm gonna admonish my Christian brothers and sisters. So we take our kids to church for 1-2 hours a week, and then we turn them loose in a public education system for
right.
30 to 40 hours a week, in which they're told drag queens are normal. They're told socialism is good, capitalism is evil and greedy, and American history. You know what American history is about? It's all about slavery and why we were bad people,
Right.
and we had to have the left come along and make this a good socialist country.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to come away with?
Well, it's an excellent point. I mean, I tell people all the time. I said, it's a whole lot easier to keep it than it is to try to get it back. And unfortunately, right now we're in the get it back mode.
We're slipping into that very fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and because of apathy, right? We sat by and watched the takeover of our colleges and
Yep.
Elementary and secondary education institutions, and then we wonder why our kids think the way they do, and it is just an artifact of the system that we created. That I get these educators all the time that complain about parents, and the parents don't do this or the parents do that or whatever, and I say, okay, let's just boil this down. You've got them 8 hours a day, and we have them maybe 30 minutes in order to wash all that out of their heads. And then the next day you get them back for 8 hours. And I said, oh, and by the way, those same parents you're complaining about are a product of the same institution. So
that is the key point. They've been taught they don't have the right to discipline their kids. They don't have the right to admonish them. That's child abuse. I want to give you one glimmer of hope and ask you to look into this real.
Okay.
You get some time. The goings on in the state of Wyoming. Now, I moved here from Wyoming, and I always want to point this out because the Wyoming Freedom Caucus is on the verge of turning the tables on the rhino establishment and including the education establishment. By the way, there's big money involved, so the rhinos in the education crowd are the education people. They're all on the left. They're all Democrats, but they're right in there in bed with the rhinos. Okay,
right.
The Wyoming Freedom Caucus is confronting this in a big way. They're looking at education accountability because there's this little scam that the education crowd pulls is they drag in drag queens, they teach them socialism, they don't teach them math, reading, writing, etc. And the test scores go down. Okay, the test scores go down. What does the education system say? We need more money. Now, if we give them more money every time they make the test scores worse, what incentive do they ever have to make it better?
Yeah.
There's an attitude that the schools aren't there for the sake of the children. The children are there for the sake of the schools. And again, if you get a chance, please look into what the Wyoming Freedom Caucus is doing and the hysterical backlash from the education system and the rhinos, because it's the picture of what needs to be happening.
Yeah.
My wife and I have always been just out in front of this with our kids, and we have made it very clear to them that since they are in public school, unfortunately, that if anybody starts talking to them about the whole LGBT, TQ type stuff, if they start talking about the drag queen, any of that kind of stuff that goes on that they know is not right, tell us immediately so that we can deal with it. And I fortunately where we live at, there's some of this stuff going on, but especially the school that my youngest son is in, he's 9, the elementary school he's in. We have a lot of parents and administrators who are not for all that stuff, and they are helping to try to fight it internally the best they can, and have pledged us they will make sure and let us know if all of a sudden they're trying to force all this stuff on them. These are real issues we're having to deal with, and I never thought it would come to this in my lifetime, but it's here as a parent now.
Well, who would have ever thought we would have had to pass a law here in Missouri that boys can't play in girls' sports? Who would ever thought we would have to pass a law that
never thought I'd see the day.
Yeah,
there was a
that said
time
you can't mutilate your kids.
Yep.
You know, so
there was a time when the first person who attempted to advocate that would have been dragged out to the end of town and dealt
Yes.
with. Okay.
yeah.
The problem is that we backed off, because as they move the goalposts, this is like our whole discussion of illegal invaders versus migrants. Is as we back off, they push forward. And we keep trying to let's find common ground with these people. There is none. They are on the opposite side of these issues. And JP, I want to commend you for what you're doing with your kids, but let's look at another side of that scenario. And I could give you examples even back. You may not believe this, but back in the ancient past, when I was in junior high school, I could give you examples. So your kids are in that environment. They're in a hostile environment, and let's just say some teacher steps out and either dresses in drag or brings a drag queen in, okay? And your kids come home, tell you about it, and you confront the school. Here's what the school is going to do. The school, they are going to ostracize your kids. They're going to brand them as troublemakers. The other kids, wanting to be on the right side of the whole virtue thing, the other kids are going to start pointing fingers at them. They become the example. Now, even if your kids stand, which knowing you, JP, your kids stand, God bless you. But there's your kids on this side, there's these extremist leftists, but there's this whole crowd in the middle that goes, wow, I agree with JP's kids, but man, I don't want to be a target. They go silent, which is pretty much what Don was talking about, the silent passive ones. They do that. Guess who wins?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right. We keep losing ground. So we had this fight with the school. I don't want to say it was a fight. I mean, it was pretty quick, actually. When the COVID vaccines came out, my wife and I were steadfast against it. Matter of fact, my wife, who is not politically driven like I am at all, and has been a registered nurse for 20 years, when Fauci and all them came out and said, hey, we got this thing called COVID, and here's what we're going to do because medical science says fight it this way. She looked at me and she said, that's not what medical science says at all. They're lying. I knew we were in trouble then. We didn't let our kids get the vaccine. We didn't get the vaccine. Even my wife being an RN, she said, there's something about it I don't trust. And so we fought that whole time. Our kids go back to school the next year. And of course, here they come. Hey, you know what? We know your kids aren't vaccinated. Yeah, you're right. And they're not going to be. Well, then they can't be in school. I said, well, that's fine. Then we're going to go and withdraw them today. And they'll be withdrawn from the school system. Oh, well, but there is an exemption you can file where they don't have to get it. But see, that never came up until we had to go ahead.
You stood your ground.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, what was it? Lenin said, we will not turn America into a communist country overnight, but we'll feed her spoonfuls of socialism until she wakes up one day and she's a communist country.
Yeah, and that's how they always do it. That's it. I've read. My wife has read some good stuff from a young lady at the time in communist China who was totally Maoist until her Maoist husband ended up in jail. By then, it's too late. He's like, her eyes are open. This is not utopia. And by then, what's she going to do about it? The only thing she could do is flee.
Yeah. Hey, Chris. State Representative Tara J. Peters. I've always wondered what that J stood for.
Depends on who you're asking.
Has just walked in and has joined us here. So we've got Chris Adamo and with us right now, and we've been talking a lot about the situation with flash his book up one more time there.
Yeah, I wanted to go and promote Chris's book for him. And also, Chris, let everybody know where they can get a copy. And also, if you're back to writing, where they can find some of your writing or what you're doing right now currently.
Right now, I've been kind of just raising Cain online, but yeah, there's my book, Rules for Defeating Radicals, Countering the Alinsky Strategy in Politics and Culture. And Don and Tara, I'd ask you guys if you would consider telling, spreading this around the real Republicans in the legislature.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tara, I was saying if you would consider spreading this around the real Republicans in the legislature, because too many, even in positions like that, too many try to fight a defensive fight, which is exactly where the opposition maneuvers us, so that at that point, a defensive fight means maybe we won't lose everything. It does not mean we will win, because you have to fight an offensive fight. You have to be proactive. And yeah, I've actually had, I was explaining before about the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. I did a seminar with them back in 2023. And I've been told by the Speaker Pro Tem of the Wyoming Legislature, Jeremy Haraldson, I've been told that my book actually changed the manner in which debate was conducted on the legislative floor, because our side started recognizing how to get back to the real issues and stay on the moral high ground where we should be, rather than fighting in this defensive fight, which just means we lose.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. If they keep us on our back foot all the time, then that's all we end up doing is backing up. And so it's time to plant our feet firmly and say no more.
And we'll fight on our premises, not theirs.
Absolutely.
Now, by the way, that's the simple message of the book. That's a spoiler alert, but I will tell you this, that you still need to read the rest of the book, because they have a million different little ploys that are very effective in getting us off of that and getting us into that defensive posture.
No, that's good. I still need to read the book. And
do you have a copy?
I do not have a copy yet.
Okay, JP, get me contact info. I'll get one for Don.
Okay. Yes. And
we'll do that.
You're going to send me a signed copy?
I will send you a signed copy.
All right.
And as a matter of fact, you too, Tara, if you guys promise me two things, that you'll at least start reading it, and if you see the value in it, that you'll share it.
Well,
I can agree to those two things.
I will guarantee you that on August the 8th, I am going to be on my way down to Gulf Shores, no matter what happens on August the 4th. And I am going to take the opportunity to get caught up on some reading that I've not been able to do for quite a little while. And what I really want to do with your book, Chris, is I'm going to put that side by side with Alinsky's book, and I'm going to go through them point by point and kind of do that kind of an analysis with it, so that I can be better prepared.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'll be honest with you, when I started writing, and I don't want to take too long here, I know I'm running out of time, but when I started writing it, I intended to write it as a point-by-point rebuttal to Alinsky.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But then I realized that Alinsky, his whole strategy, it's a malignancy, it's a cancer, and it has morphed and metastasized since then. And so what I had to do was not just point by point against Alinsky, but say, what has this morphed into? What has this metastasized into? And that's pretty much what I'm dealing with in the book there. So it's good to know what he was about. It's much more important to see what they're doing now and how unhinged they become with it. And that's what we need to confront.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate you coming on and getting us that update. And also thank you for the copy of the book. I appreciate that.
Well, look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. And I'm tell Dave we miss him, but I'm really glad I don't have to listen to a really bad pun at this point.
I mean, if you want a bad joke, I can fill in for Dave.
No, that's okay, JP.
Well, I am a dad, so I've got a few dad jokes.
We've all got them. God bless you guys. I'll sign out here.
Yeah. See you. All right. Joining us in the studio is one of my favorite state representatives.
Lord, now you sound like Governor Kehoe.
I'm
Where'd you get that from?
going to try the applause thing.
That is.
We'll see if that comes through.
There's 163, and I'm not going to say that all of the 163 are in my category of favorites, but you certainly are.
Well, thank you.
I would put you in the top 162 for sure.
Okay,
so.
I'll take that.
Now, Tara is, you are technically a junior this next term, correct?
Yes, Lord willing. If I get reelected, yes, a junior.
And so that means you've got 4 years left, right?
Halfway through.
Halfway through. It goes by quick, doesn't it?
Really quick.
Yeah. So tell us, Tara, a little bit about some of the stuff that you've been working on. Maybe start with the stuff that you had this session. I know you had a couple of things get passed.
I did. I went yesterday to Governor Kehoe's office. He signed, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the number. I believe it's 1214, but I had a piece of there. Most of my stuff that got passed was all healthcare legislation. And so it was a crime bill. But obviously the expansion of pseudoephedrine for allergy sufferers, that became a problem a while ago, because obviously we were making meth with it in the state of Missouri.
Right.
And so now that, fentanyl has, taken over for meth, they're not making as much of it anymore. And those that actually use it for, the intended purpose,
Right.
if you're an allergy sufferer out there, you can go and get a bigger supply of it
Mhm.
when needed instead of it being restricted. So that was signed into law yesterday. So very excited about that.
Well, so, and that's actually common through a lot of drugs that are out there. Fentanyl, for instance, fentanyl has a actual medical purpose. It's, if I remember correctly, it's used to knock you out,
Yep.
for an operation, and it's very good for that. But it is also cheap and easy to make,
Yep.
which unfortunately, attracts those among us who are in the recreational pharmaceutical business and do not have our best interest.
Yeah,
at heart.
absolutely.
So thank you for that. So something and I know you didn't carry the bill this year, or maybe you did. Maybe you also filed the bill on the PBM stuff. Did you carry that last term?
No, I think that was Benny's bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So John Hukin,
John
state
Hugan
representatives
and
carried it.
Representative Benny Cook filed something for the PBMs. And so there was a portion of it that is in on Monday. Governor Kehoe will sign the 3 additional pieces that I had. One of them is the ginormous health bill, healthcare bill, which is 2372. And there's a ton of components in there. And some of that PBM language, I believe, is in 2372. So.
Okay. You also had passed previously some 340B changes.
Yep. So
Yeah.
340B, there's a portion of that in there. And then you should be proud because I think you were the one that punted that to me, but the dietitians finally
Yeah.
got their legislation passed and you started that. So
Right. Yeah. Go ahead and tell us about it while you're on that subject.
yeah, so on Monday, Governor Kehoe will sign into law something to help our dietitians in 2 ways. One, it allows them to have a temporary license while they're waiting to take a test, which helps with continuing of care when we have our dietitians in the hospital. It's a really hard test to take and to pass. And so we've had some instances where some of the people that took that test, necessarily they were already employed, but they couldn't, they didn't pass the test. So you have to wait a time period
Right.
to take the next one. This will allow them to still be employed under the supervision of a registered dietitian,
Right.
but that'll allow them to have a temporary license. And there was a compact part of that as well. So it allows our dietitians to cross state lines with the license that they have, which again, if someone's in the St. Louis border there and they live in Illinois
Right.
and say they went to the hospital, they'd be able to take continuum of care over the state line.
So they can get a job in another state.
So they can get a job.
And
in
if we
another
are shorthanded, those folks from those states can come in. Now, does that dilute our law in any way?
No.
So if I remember correctly, all of those compacts, when you join a compact, you have to come up to the highest standard.
Mhm.
At least those are the ones I'm familiar with. Was that the same with the dietitians?
It
you had
was.
to come up to the highest standard?
Yeah, there was a lot of negativity towards the bill with compacts. They claimed that it was actually taking away the rights of the state, that the
Right.
federal laws would supersede those of the state. And the language in the compacts, especially the dietitian one, did not take any of that away. So
No, I remember some of those arguments, and they were nonsensical. It was, sovereignty of the state of Missouri. Well, I don't know how that affects the sovereignty of the state of Missouri, especially when all of those employees, we're talking about people who are working, and especially in the healthcare industry where we're shorthanded in the first place. But imagine that registered nurse, for instance. This wasn't about registered nurses; this is about dietitians. But imagine that registered nurse who's working on the Missouri side and gets offered a job on the Kansas side for more money.
Yeah.
can't accept the job because then they have to go through the entire licensing procedure and test and everything in Kansas. Well, that makes absolutely no sense, especially when you realize that the test for registered nurse is identical in every respect to the test in Missouri. And so same is true, I believe, with dietitians. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it is correct. We have a lot of, I mean, as a real estate agent too, I can only practice in the state of Missouri with the
Right.
license that I have. So if I wanted to sell houses in Illinois or sell houses in Arkansas or Kansas, you'd have to get an individual license from every one of those states to, in order to do that.
So it sounds anti-competition if you're against it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is competition for labor and things like that. Why should that state border be affect
Deterrent,
that?
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when we need those people. And it seems so. I mean, I'm an engineer and a surveyor. Now, in engineering, I would agree to a compact, for instance, for engineering, because our rules, the laws, the way we do engineering is identical from state to state. The old saying, it all flows downhill kind of a thing. And so we're not engineering anything differently from one state to the other. There may be small nuances with the law from one state to the other as far as water and wastewater is concerned, but certainly not structures and bridges and things like that. And those have been things that have been built in, those standards, for hundreds of years, actually. So a compact with engineers would be something I wouldn't object to, but a compact with surveyors would be different because our surveying law is different in Missouri than it is in Kansas.
Sure.
It came under a different set of rules. But on those cases where I don't care what state you go to, a dietitian is going to have the same education requirement, going to have the same test that they have to take for licensure, and it just makes sense. And I just, that is so, to be against that, it seems to be so anti-free market.
Sure. No, I think this is a great bill. It opens up the pipeline again. Like you said, we have a shortage of healthcare providers, whether it's a dietitian or let's just talk about social workers too. Governor Keogh is also going to sign on Monday a bill that I got passed this year that has to expanding, social workers, which helps our mentally ill people and those that are having, family counseling and all of that type of thing. Currently, the state law for Missouri is that you have to have 5 years under supervision in order to become a licensed social worker.
Wow.
5 years is a really long time.
Right.
We needed to open that pipeline, and other states around us all had done the same thing. And so this year we've decreased it to 3. So it's allowing you to, again, practice still being under supervision, just it's allowing and cutting 2 years off of that. And it's not, again, decreasing any requirements. We're not dumbing down the profession. There was a lot of things about where we're, making cuts and making shortages and they're not getting the training they need. That's not what it is at all. We need to open up that industry so that more social workers can practice. And so that's all that this did.
And just as a comparison there, engineers are 4, right? We have to work for a licensed engineer for 4, but lawyers, for instance, can walk out of law school, pass a bar exam, and go to work practicing law the next day.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
when you write the laws and, you have an
exactly.
advantage over some of the other ones.
So, I mean, some would argue that the education replaces it, but I can tell you that I learned all the engineering when I was working in engineering. I learned how to research and find things and calculate things while I was in college, but it wasn't teaching me engineering, right? And so there is a need for that on the job kind of a thing under supervision. I wouldn't be, and I would never suggest that we should get rid of that, but we need to make it comparable to what the job is, right?
Right.
And I'm not downplaying at all the need for the social workers or what their job is, but you're right. 5 years is a bit extreme when you consider engineers are only require 4 and lawyers don't have to have any time on the job. So as long as their education background and they do get that clinical experience in the field, it makes perfect sense. And also at the state of Missouri, we're having trouble having social workers to do a lot of things, right?
Tons of things. Our mental health crisis that's going on.
Yeah.
We need social workers for that. Family counseling, drug counseling. I mean, there is a huge need. And I think that just, again, opens the pipeline so that we can have more people in that industry serving more people.
Yeah, and I mean, it affects us right down even at our county jail level. We have an enormous number of people who are in our county jails, and the numbers in that 50% category that are either waiting for a mental health evaluation, waiting to be treated so that they can stand trial, and or be released. So there's about 86 people that just what I call retired out. And the only way we have a handle on these numbers is by the amount of jail per diem that we pay. The state pays the county for people who ultimately end up going into the system. But a lot of these folks are spending more time in county jail than their sentence for the crime that they committed would have yielded. So it makes absolutely no sense, but until you realize that we're shorthanded at the state, so we can't get these evaluations done, but they can't move through the justice system until they get those evaluations done and get treated. And so I don't think that's justice. That's not speedy justice for sure. And keep in mind, these folks are innocent until proven guilty. This is pretrial confinement. And I'm not sticking up for lawbreakers. What I'm saying is that because of the shortages at the state level and because of decisions that are made at the state level, we end up doing stuff like that. That's crazy, no pun intended.
You're right.
So,
absolutely.
So what else what else was on that bill that you got passed at the governor's
Well,
sign?
2372, we could spend about 2 hours. There's 57 provisions. It is an omnibus bill, but it is all healthcare related items. So it's everything from now, if you need a handicap placard, before you had to go to your physical therapist and they actually had to write you a waiver to go to the doctor. It was a big process, actually through your physician. And so now if you're getting physical therapy, it allows you an easier process to get the handicap placards for your car. We did a lot of protections for, daycare centers to protect a lot of kids these days have allergies, everything from, nuts to whatever it is. And so Terry Violet had a bill, I believe, that had something to do with distribution of epinephrine. And so it's not just the EpiPen that we use anymore. It expanded those so that there are things now that you could put a tab under your tongue or you could do some other things. And so it made that process that would make our daycare safer and required to get training in order to do that. No, that's actually Murphy's Law. That came from Representative Jim Schulte. So that has to do with the allergies in the daycare centers. There's a lot of alpha-gal, Lyme disease stuff on there. That was from Representative Matthew Overcast.
And see, I like that.
Yep.
Yeah, because that's extremely important right now. I know I just talked to a lady knocking doors the other day. She just got diagnosed with alpha-gal. And so some of the concern from our more libertarian members were concerned that this created some kind of database to the federal government and all of that. Can you talk about what it really does there?
I can. So right now, I hate to tell you this, but if you have a communicable disease, they're tracking every bit of that anyway. So I think that alpha-gal and Lyme disease is a little less, worrisome that they're keeping your data. There was a big argument between being able to opt in and opt out on whether you wanted to be a part of that collection data process. But again, I mean, after hearing testimony about, I think everybody has alpha-gal these days. I mean, there are so many people that it affects. There was a mass amount of people that came to the Capitol, and we're just trying to be able to get a handle on it so that we know in Missouri, how many people it's affecting, how we can try to eradicate some of it. And so it's just a process of it's, I hate to use the word tracking. Maybe you can come up with a better word for it.
But it was just counting heads.
Yeah.
Right? There was your name wasn't associated with it. It was just like the number of people who caught measles or whatever.
Absolutely.
So the health department tracks those records and has for a long time for certain diseases. And this was just one that wasn't tracked. As you pointed out, they're already doing it. And some of those are associated with your name. But on those common, ordinary things, it was only a way for the federal government to be able to judge how much resources need to be applied to a particular thing. No one
just trying to get a handle on it. So we can find out details and information on it so that there can be some type of a educated plan to help with that.
Well, because we know how the federal government works. It devotes resources based on a lot of different things. Some of them we don't agree with, right? But if the only way it can recognize a problem is if it knows there's a problem. And if there's 5 people with alpha-gal in the state of Missouri, well, maybe we just worry about treating those 5 people. But if there's 500,000 people with alpha-gal, now all of a sudden we probably ought to be looking at a strategy to eradicate it. Well, there's a big difference in how much money we're going to put on that problem, depending.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and no one wants people to suffer with alpha-gal.
Right.
And if we can develop a treatment, which is still yet going to be based on the amount of exposure, right? Look how much money we spent on COVID, for Pete's sake, and which is what we're kind of the theme. I had to slide that in there.
Well, and I'm going to tell you, so you don't think, I heard JP talking about, you don't think that when you had tested and your data wasn't collected, that they knew that your kid was exposed and couldn't go to school? And I mean, come on now. I mean, if you really think that, the health department did know and wasn't tracking and knowing who all that stuff, and then you're going to, alpha-gal's going to be your worry, I think that's a.
But that was the concern,
Yeah,
right? Because of that, we created that whole COVID thing, created this big mistrust in government, especially related to our health.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100% understandable. And so I can get people's apprehension, but sooner or later, the facts have to win, right? Rather than the conspiracy theory, right? And so if you're willing to just ignore the facts that are staring you right in the face in favor of your confirmation bias research, then that's not going to make it better for those people who are suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you have it, why would you not want to be a part of that? We need to, again, how are we going to know where to treat and how to treat and how to educate unless we have, everybody talks about the data. Well, we don't have any data. Well, we need to get some of it so that we can actually.
And so a lot of those folks that do those kind of complaints don't have any trouble at all giving all of their personal information to Facebook and Google and all of the others. Which you've heard me talk about this before. I cannot see a reason why Facebook needs to know my favorite color, my favorite book, or my favorite movie. And I think, as I've said many a time, I think we should have the right to go in and clean that extraneous data. Not the data that they need to provide the service to me, right? I sign an agreement to use their service. They need to know my name and my ISP number and all that, right? But they don't need to know my kids' birthdays. They don't need to know my grandkids' birthdays. But that's not what we're even talking about, right?
We're not.
Yeah, it's collecting, counting heads.
Counting heads.
Yeah. Well,
so you guys are state reps. So I'm kind of, I guess, citizen 101 in the room, right? So we got an election coming up 3 weeks away, August 4th. Don, you're very involved in this, obviously. You're running for state senate. But there's other ballot issues, not just in Phelps County, but statewide. Are there any state measures that everybody listening to, especially if they're in the state of Missouri, need to be aware of, especially when it comes to wording? Wording with these amendments or anything else with propositions can get very tricky.
I walk in the morning with ladies, walked again this morning, ran into Don on the sidewalk. People are confused.
Yep.
So I had a conversation again today. They're like, so can you educate me? Are we voting yes or no? And then I explained it and they're like, oh, well, I thought it was yes or no. The wording is so convoluted right now that, I mean, I'm sorry, we're going to have to have classes. We're going to have a TED talk and invite people to come in because, I mean, it's all confusing. Nobody knows if you're really voting yes or you're fixing it.
But that's
or you
the
vote
problem.
No, or you're fixing it. And no,
it's not supposed to be that way.
Mm-mm.
It wasn't there a measure
I
that
don't
we're supposed to
disagree.
clean up the ballot
Yeah.
language?
Yeah.
So what's happening with that?
So that would be Amendment 4. Now, on Amendment 4, I can boil that one down to just one statement.
Okay.
And our Constitution changes. There's a copy of it over there.
Yeah.
But basically, it's this big, huge book.
Can you pull the part of the 32 pages of marijuana?
There's 43 actually, but
I thought it was 30.
so it's right now it just takes 50% plus one in any election to add something. So the outside interests have been jamming a lot of stuff into our Constitution, marijuana being one of them, Medicaid expansion being another one, and so those are all things that out here in the rural areas we object to. I mean, you can just look at the voting on that. Well, right now, St. Louis and Kansas City and Boone County can pass anything they want. Some of that's because our own fault because we're not voting, but for the most part, they can shove whatever they want to down our throat. Well, if we pass this amendment, Amendment 4, then they have to come to us because it has to pass by 50% plus one in each and every congressional district. Okay, so people who are afraid that's somehow taking their power away, you didn't have it in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, that's the way our Constitution reads. The people can petition, but somebody show me one amendment, certainly in the last 30, 40 years, that the people instituted, not some outside interest outside the state of Missouri. So that's not to say that folks that somehow wouldn't get together at some point in the future and do that. But if it is, it should be of statewide importance, right? Which means that each congressional district would be voting for or against it anyway, right?
Yep.
But our Constitution keeps expanding, and they keep getting stuff put in there that we don't, out here in the rural areas, we don't agree. So Amendment 4, I can boil it down to, if you think you as a rural person need a voice in what goes in the Constitution, then you need to vote for this. So that's my opinion on 4.
I agree with Don on that.
Yeah.
Are there any other
Well, 5
measures
is the
or- yeah.
removal of the income tax.
Yep.
And then we've got 1, which is the sales tax for the conservation department. 1/8%. 1/8 of a percent.
That's
Help me out.
that's the soil and water conservation tax. So I actually like the way we do this. It comes up every 4 years? It comes up for renewal. So in other words, the voters get the opportunity to, unlike other things like the gas tax and the tax conservation tax and these others that are absolutely truly abused. This one here, the departments who take advantage of it have to prove their worth. They have to convince the voters on that regular cycle to renew this for them. Well, I think that's fair. I don't have any particular problem with the soil and water conservation tax. It is actually doing its job, but you know why it's doing its job? Because it comes up for a sunset, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan, and I even filed a bill that every constitutional tax gets sunsetted, right?
Yeah.
And of course, you know how far that thing got down the road.
Not very far, right?
Yeah. But yes, the Soil and Water Conservation Act. There's another one too, I believe it is allowing charter counties to elect their assessor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll get the numbers wrong here, but the reason it doesn't affect us out here in the rural area because we already elect our assessor. But in those charter counties, they were just an employee, and so they weren't subject to the voters at all. And so what happened up in Jackson County, the end result of the assessor's analysis was to raise everybody's property taxes through the assessment process by 150%.
Which is significant, and then have no answer to it at all.
No recourse to it whatsoever. And so so folks in Jackson County, I specifically said, we should have the option. That shouldn't be an employee of the county commission because they're a charter form, so they've got like 10 or 11 members or something like that. I'm not familiar with how they're constituted, but they just hire somebody for the job. Well, then those people are elected on a different cycle, right? So there was really no accountability in that assessment process. I'm a huge fan of pulling the state tax commission out of county taxes in the first place. Why does the state of Missouri, they don't get a single dime out of our property assessment taxes? Why are they involved in the first place? Can you answer that question, Tara?
I cannot.
Okay.
But I feel there's 4, right? Are we missing one?
So Amendment 5 that you talked about,
We
which
talked
was
4 and 5. 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. Yeah.
so
was
3
5 on the state Missouri tax, right?
So
Income
that
tax.
Yes, 5 is the removal of the income tax.
So I'm interested from a state representative perspective, your thoughts on it, because I've heard really good arguments. I feel good arguments on each side.
I have as well.
Some that are for it, some that are
The
against
thing
it.
I'm most disturbed about, and I hate to, and I'm not going to get on my Representative Darren Chappell came last night and
Yeah.
spoke to our committee on Amendment 5, and he does an excellent job.
Yep.
He knows it in and out. And then we had some rebuttal that come, and all I keep hearing from the side against is, well, when we get ready to make these decisions, you can't trust the politicians. You can't trust. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, if I hate to tell all of you this, but when you elect your rep, we're making way bigger decisions about your life than the income tax, right? And so
Yep.
now all of a sudden, because of the income tax, you're going to get up and say, well, we can't trust the politicians to do the right thing. Well, if you didn't elect somebody that you've trusted in the first place, and I know that this is being like overly, you got bigger problems.
Right.
So,
Yep.
I mean, in my position, my constituents, if next year it's passed and Amendment 5 is passed and we're talking about it, raising the sales tax on things, and we get in there and they're going to raise sales tax on healthcare and agriculture and real estate, which we've heard that, the governor's not going to do some of those things. Do you not think we pay taxes too on services and goods? So do you really think that, we're going to get in there and be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea? I do believe that we need to modernize the tax code. I do. I think that we're in a time, and I've explained this before to people. We used to shop at bookstores and we used to shop at the mall, and you used to be able to go in and get things, and all those things were taxed, and nobody goes to a bookstore hardly anymore. No, but there are no malls to go shopping with, right? Everything's ordered on the website. You have your Walmart delivery delivered. Everything is, it's moved on, right? We need to modernize it. What does that look like? I'm not saying that the plan that we come up with is, we have to get there. We have to have permission to move that plan forward. And I got to tell you that if you're in a district where you don't trust the person that you elected, you've got bigger problems. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So, so talking to folks at the doors, there's a lot of angst out there about Amendment 5, and there's a lot of misinformation. In other words, some folks are saying, well, you're going to double the sales tax. And I tell them that no, if we end up with Tennessee, right, if the model we're shooting for is Tennessee, then we'll actually here in Missouri have an opportunity to lower the sales tax. And then they'll say, well, what about the sales tax in my town? It's already 10% or whatever. Well, the provisions in this constitutional amendment require that any tax has to meet the revenue neutral thing related to getting rid of the income tax. Okay, so when most people understand that part of it, that, hey, it's revenue neutral, we've got this, and that could give you enough reason to vote for it just on that alone. My problem is, which I share with a lot of folks who are more informed on it, is sort of what Tara was talking about. I'm in the legislature now, but I may or may not be next year. And so while I trust myself to keep an eye on the exceptions, I do understand how Jeff City operates. And that is, he who has the highest price lobbyist gets an exception. And so Art Lafferstead, who is kind of a proponent of what we're calling here is the fair tax, he says no exceptions, right? The only way this works is no exceptions or very few.
Yeah.
And they better have a good reason for that exception. Okay, so my business, I'm an engineer and a surveyor. My business, which would be one that would be subject to this new tax. So I would essentially have to pay a sales tax for that. Well, you're already paying my income tax. You're paying my income tax and my employees' income tax. You just don't see it on the bill. Well, now when you get a bill from me, you're going to see how much tax you pay. Okay. And I'm actually okay with all of that. But I don't want it to be just the surveyors and engineers paying the tax.
Yep.
Because we weren't smart enough or didn't have enough money to get the lobbyists, so that the lawyers and the accountants don't have to pay the tax, but the surveyors and engineers do. Well, if we shift that balance then into just a handful of categories of folks who didn't, go to the Capitol and get themselves an exception, well, then I'm not for that part. But I am willing at this point to let the process work itself out, right? If it doesn't pass, it's because we didn't provide people, it's pig and a poke, right? We didn't provide people enough information on what they were going to get out of this. And that's what I firmly believe. I had a bill I was working on, and that would have done that. I basically took Tennessee, and we were working out the details of that. We just ran out of time because I was trying to get input from all sides: Chamber of Commerce, small business, NFIB, and those kind of folks. And there were too many moving parts. But a bill like that anyway takes several years. But I did want to get it filed and on the floor or in committee, so we could start working out some of those details. But leadership decided that, well, they didn't want a competing bill. And although mine wouldn't have been a competing bill, it would have been a bill that would have said, this is what you're going to get if this passes.
It actually would have complemented it.
It would have complemented it.
Yeah.
But because, we're all about hanging heads on the wall. We're not necessarily about doing the right thing. Do I have confidence in the people I serve with right now? Well, absolutely. Is that going to change over time?
Good.
100%.
Yep.
So I have the same angst that a lot of the voters have out there. I like the idea of a fair tax. I love it. And I do think that most people would love it. But you've got to be able to give people a clear idea of what it is they're voting for. And I don't think we've done a good job of that yet. So we'll see in the coming days where we get on that. But folks, I say pay attention.
Yep.
If you decide that it's not for you, then
and we have an election coming up. Do your due diligence on go vote and make sure that the candidate you're voting for is someone that you know and trust. And if you don't know them or trust them, you need to start calling your friends. And again, I just think you need to do your due diligence. So.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of our country is that if you live in a state or a county where you don't trust your representation, you feel another area of the state or another state aligns better, you can always move. That's the beauty of this country. You have
not only that, but now you can change it. You don't like who your rep is and you don't trust them. Now's the time.
Yep.
And
Speak up.
If you don't feel like there's anyone available, that the ballot for state representative or the availability run for state representative happens every 2 years.
Absolutely.
And I welcome people to get involved in that process so they can understand how it works. Yeah.
Well, we have our next guest who's right. Terry, you want to stay on for a little while?
Yeah, sure.
You can hang around.
Okay. Well, we got Thomas. Going to add him in here. Tom Haviland, who he's been. Well, Tom, I'm going to let you. I don't want to take your thunder away, but this guy has been on it the entire time about COVID vaccines. He's faced a lot of ridicule, even fired from his defense contracting position because he refused to take the jab. And now, all of a sudden, things that people were saying that he was finding that might be conspiracy theory are suddenly now gaining traction, and he's got some new developments on that. So, Tom Haviland, welcome to the show.
Thanks, JP. I appreciate you having me on the show. Here's what we're talking about, folks. For those who can see, these unusual white fibrous clots that embalmers with 20 or 30 years of experience had never seen before until the years of COVID and the COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah.
I've conducted worldwide surveys in the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand over the past 4 years, from the end of 2022 through the end of 2025, to survey these embalmers around the world and see what they're seeing. And the results of my 4 surveys have been shocking. In fact, they were recently written up in an article that appeared was picked up by a journal, scientific journal called the International Journal of Innovative Research in Medical Science. And that was posted on the 1st of July of 2026, just about 10 days ago. And basically it highlights my survey results over the past 4 years. And in the surveys, basically we have 4 key points. First of all, we have shown that it is indeed a worldwide phenomenon. Embalmers in all these countries, Canada, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, are identifying these white fibrous clots. And it's the majority of embalmers seeing these clots. And every year I've done the survey, the results have been about anywhere between 66% to 83% of the embalmers seeing this phenomenon, with an average of 75%. So about 3 out of every 4 embalmers says they are indeed seeing these white fibrous clots in their corpses. Prior to COVID, by the way, they only saw 2 types of clots. They saw what's called grape jelly clots. They look just like dark grape jelly. They dissolve very easily in your hands. They had also seen another type of clot called a chicken fat clot, which are small, yellowish in color and tear very easily. Much, much different than these humongous white fibrous clots that are tough and rubbery. Embalmers describe them as what looks like calamari, and they stretch like a rubber band, and they can get over
like
a
protein
foot.
chains.
Say that again.
It's like protein chains,
Yes, and what I can tell you is that I've been in touch with a scientific team that's been analyzing the clots for the last 2 years, led by Mr. Greg Harrison in Sydney, Australia. And his team has strong evidence that through all this different testing done on the clots, that what's happening is the spike protein, either from the COVID virus itself, because there's a spike protein on the surface of the virus,
right,
or the mRNA produced spike protein from the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, is binding with our natural blood clotting protein called fibrinogen. We all have that. It's produced by the liver, and it's in a liquid form in our blood plasma. And whenever there's damage done to our vascular system, our veins and arteries, you get a cut on your arm, for example, it triggers the clotting response. And it's triggered by what's called the endothelial lining, the thin inner wall of those veins or arteries. And it triggers the conversion of that natural fibrinogen that's produced by the liver, that's in our blood plasma, from a liquid form into a white solid called fibrin. And that fibrin at the microscopic level looks like nice, loose cooked spaghetti noodles. They form like a net, and they collect your red blood cells and your platelets, and they form a clot at the site of the cut on your arm, for example, so you don't bleed out to death. And then when finally that wound is healed and the clot's no longer necessary, then we have another enzyme that comes along called plasmin, Plasmin. Plasmin attaches to the clot and breaks it down, and then you're good to go again. The clot's gone. But in the case of these white fibrous clots, these tough clots, that fibrinogen is binding with the spike protein from either the virus or the COVID vaccine, and instead producing these very tough, what's called misfolded, twisted amyloid proteins, amyloid, which is just a fancy term for a misshaped or twisted protein, that then becomes very difficult for that enzyme plasmin to break down. So then they start off as small, what's called microclots, and then they aggregate into these large white fibrous clots to the point where they cannot be broken down at all, even by the best blood thinners that our doctors have, like tissue plasminogen activator. I'm in touch with an endovascular specialist and cardiologist from Jacksonville, Florida, who's been removing these same white fibrous clots from living people for the last 5 years. And they use TPA at first, and it does a beautiful job of breaking down the grape jelly clots and the chicken fat clots, but it has no effect whatsoever on these really tough white fibrous clots. So then he has to go in with flexible catheters in his cath lab that either suck the clot out, scrape it out, or lasso the clot and pull it out. In fact, he calls these kind of clots devious clots because they're very difficult to get out. And if they're in the wrong location, such as, the lungs, the brain, the heart, strokes and heart attacks.
Yeah. So, and so during that time period when a lot of this stuff was being discovered, that, we were seeing a higher incidence, a considerably higher incidence of stroke and heart issues in young people. And so some of the YouTube videos out there, I think some of them are yours, that I watched on the subject were, these are otherwise healthy young people who no history of heart disease or anything, and suddenly they keel over from a stroke. And then it's discovered that in their veins they have these things that are pretty much just blocking their arteries with that stuff that you discovered.
And that's the tragedy of all this. You're right. It's hitting all age groups, especially young people, as well as the elderly. In fact, about a year or so ago, I had to go to a funeral for my cousin, John. His daughter passed away with a brain aneurysm, and she was 24 years old. Now, I looked up the odds of a 20 to 30-year-old having a brain aneurysm, and it's about 1 in 100,000. Well, she really beat the odds. And although I did not ask at a funeral because I thought it was inappropriate to ask at the time, his daughter worked for the county, it was a county in Ohio. She was a court reporter, and also she volunteered her summers to do work with the marching band for the local high school, helping them get ready for the upcoming football season. So I'm sure she was required to take the COVID-19 vaccines to be around the kids at the high school, and also for her government job at the county court. And she actually passed away. She was very excited at the time. She was sitting at the kitchen table at her mom and dad's house, talking to her mom, She was on her phone, and she was just getting ready. She and her fiance were getting ready to get married. They had just purchased a house, and she dropped dead, died suddenly right in front of her mother.
And so we hear this story a lot, and especially the stuff that this is it's not just you, it's everywhere, and in any normal time period or talking about any other disease, the government would be laser focused on this, right? It would be everywhere. There would be studies being produced by the federal government. There would be doctors with cautionary and suggested treatments, and be on the lookout for and be counting these people who end up with these these kind of illnesses that are unusual, and then the appearance of these type of clots. But it's crickets.
Yeah, because they pushed the vaccines that these clots are being caused by. That's the reason they're staying quiet about it. Right. And this is not a rare phenomenon, by the way. In my 4 years of surveys, the embalmers have been seeing these unusual white fibrous clots in an average, get this, of 23% of their corpses. Almost 1 out of every 4 dead bodies still has these these white fibrous clots in them. In fact, on May the 31st, just less than a couple months ago, I was a guest speaker for the 2nd year in a row at the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association's annual convention in Chattanooga. The previous year they had it in Nashville. This year they had it in Chattanooga. I went there. I actually brought with me one of the embalmers from the Died Suddenly movie, Mr. Richard Hirschman, which is a film I don't know if your audience is familiar with. It's about an hour-long documentary. About half the movie is devoted to these 6 or 7 embalmers that said they were seeing these white fibrous clots in their corpses back in November of 2022. So they were some of the first to bravely speak out about this. But you're right. I've sent the results of my surveys for the last 4 years immediately after I get the survey results to the NIH, CDC, and FDA. Nothing but crickets for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Acknowledge there was even a problem, let alone look into it.
So we was just mentioning that earlier in the show where the discovery we found shortly after COVID was that most of the people on the CDC board and the NIH board and the FDA are either former employees of the big pharmaceutical companies or large stockholders in those pharmaceutical companies. So putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and which led us to where we're kind of at today on a lot of the stuff where people just absolutely don't trust a single word that comes out of their mouth anymore. And that's unfortunate, because of all the organizations that need 100% trust in them, it's those 3 organizations. But if we've gotten to the point in this country where we can't trust them because they have an ulterior motive for everything they do, imagine the potential health concerns that we could run into in the future when we have rather than a boy cries wolf kind of a thing, we have a real problem, and then we don't get participation on a high level. And imagine that scenario. And I don't know how we get it back. How do we get the trust back into the system?
Trust is very hard to recover once it's been lost. And you're right, it's been lost in our government system. The CDC, the NIH, the FDA, HHS, they're supposed to be looking out for the health of us, the people. But you're right, there's been this revolving door where people are allowed to go to work for Big Pharma, then go to work for these regulatory agencies, and then go back to work for Big Pharma after they work for these regulatory agencies. What we really need to do is, when people decide what career path they're going to go on, we need to make them go down one of 2 paths, right? Either you can go to Big Pharma and work for them, or you go work for the regulatory agencies that support us, the American people, and forego working for Big Pharma. So, sign some kind of agreement that you'll never go to work for Big Pharma. So that is one way to stop this from happening. But you're right, it's so embedded now that it's almost impossible for us to ever go back the other direction. And people have lost trust, and not just in those 3-letter agencies, but in the medical system as well, right? The trust in doctors is plummeted.
Go ahead, Tara.
Hey Tom, I just had a question. So I was
Yeah.
really proud a couple years ago. Our local coroner, or Ernie Coverdell, him and I had a long discussion about, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you said you spoke to the funeral directors, but I think there was a time where it was not required on the death certificate, right, to have on there whether they were vaccinated or not. And I remember having a conversation with our local coroner, and he said, heck yeah, we're gonna put on that report that whether or not they've been vaccinated or not. So if in fact in the future there's going to be research done, they can pull that, right? Because he said he was seeing the same thing that you were talking about, that, and it wasn't just like weird clots. I mean, he was talking about, and I'm not trying to be too graphic, but like literally like dispelling blood out of orifices that normally didn't happen, and those types of things. So is it true right now? Do we have any kind of law requirement that if you're a coroner that you have to put on the death certificate whether or not they were vaccinated?
You're a coroner that you talk to is a rarity, because almost no coroners or medical examiners are doing that, Tara. They are, in fact, a lot of the embalmers I talk to and funeral directors, when they get their death certificate, it may say stroke, heart attack, or thrombosis, which is a technical word for a clot.
Right.
It will not say what type of clot it was. It would never say whether it was the COVID vaccine, that person had taken the COVID vaccine or not. So there is no linkage there. And the problem, and we've tried, by the way, to try to get records out of each of our state. I'm in Ohio, for example, and we've tried to get the death records of people that have died in Ohio over the last 5 years to see if the ones that are dying with these strokes and heart attacks or have predominantly taken the COVID-19 vaccines, information that the state does have, but they refuse to release that information.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we know why. They push the vaccines, and the last thing they want to do is admit the vaccines they pushed are causing these strokes and heart attacks.
Yeah, HIPAA on dead people, right? It's the craziness of it. We heard this story about the guy who died in a car accident, and then his death certificate was listed as COVID. Well, so that's not an urban legend. I talked to the person, they live right here in Rolla, Missouri, who told me this story. It may have happened other places, but back during the COVID thing, I was at a meeting and he came up to me and he said, let me tell you what's going on. And he told me the story about his brother-in-law who had died in a motorcycle accident down in Florida. So he'd gone down there to help his sister with, the final arrangements and things like that. Well, one of the things they needed was the death certificate for the life insurance policy. And so he went to the hospital to pick up the death certificate. And he says, well, yeah, okay, the guy hands him the death certificate and he looks down there and it says COVID as the cause of death. He goes, whoa, hang on a second. You guys made a mistake. My brother-in-law died in a motorcycle accident. And so the guy takes it back and he looks at it and he goes, okay. He said, you probably need this to get your life insurance, right? And he goes, yeah. He goes, do you realize what we're going to have to go through to get this changed from COVID to motorcycle accident? And he goes, well, no, well, that's wrong. And he goes, well, first of all, I have to go to the doctor who signed this death certificate, and he has to admit that he was wrong, that it wasn't COVID. Then it has to go to a board of directors at the hospital to figure out why he made such a diagnosis, right? And he said, all of that, especially with COVID going on and nobody at the hospital, is going to take a year and a half. But I'm betting you need the money right now. And he goes, so what do you want me to do? And so he goes, and he says, and besides, how do you know he didn't have COVID when he had the motorcycle accident? And so you know what the guy did? He's, well, I can't wait 18 months. Give me the death certificate.
Okay, so if that's the case, so let's get into this then. And Tom, you may have information on this too. Then why is that happening? Why are they mismarking deaths? So
that's easy, JP. You're absolutely right. Even though COVID vaccines are never mentioned as the cause of death on the death certificate, COVID has been mentioned a lot on death certificates. And the reason is everybody gets money. The hospitals get money for every COVID death that was labeled as COVID. And also the families of the deceased got a free $7,500 from the government to go towards the funeral cost of their loved one if the death certificate indeed said COVID as a cause of death on it. So and then, of course, the funeral homes are happy because they know they're going to get paid the $7,500 from the family of the deceased. So everybody was incentivized to have COVID listed as a cause of death. The hospitals, the doctors, the family of the deceased, and then the funeral home who gets to see a funeral, as opposed to somebody who might select to do a cremation instead, they don't make as much money on if the family doesn't have the money to do a proper funeral.
So to your point on the money, a hospital director who will go unnamed, it wasn't here, was telling me the story about the truck that showed up with $100,000 of PPE, masks, gowns, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so he goes, well, that's more PPE than we'll use in 5 years. And he goes, well, we don't care. We got this contract and probably paid too much for it. And so you either take it or somebody else will. And he goes, well, I mean, I do need some. So, okay, unload it. And because there's issues with how long some of this stuff stays around, he told the guy, he said, look, if you're doing this in every hospital, most of this is going to end up in the trash, and simply because of age. And the guy goes, we don't care. We got the money, we spend it on this, you do with it whatever you want to do with it. And he said, I've talked to him recently, and he said, you know what happened to all of that excess PPE? He said, we tried to give it away to health departments and people like that, and they were fully stocked. And he said, so, the only choice we had was to pitch it because we're not going to get sued for using expired masks or whatever it was, right?
The fraud, waste, and abuse it was horrendous.
Terrible.
Right? And one of the other areas where it was horrendous was actually the vials of the vaccine produced by companies like Pfizer and Moderna itself. They produce millions, hundreds of millions of vials of vaccine, and a lot of that has not been used over the past few years. In fact, even though 80% of American adults over the age of 18 took the COVID-19 vaccines in 2021, the first year that the vaccines were offered, only 1 out of 5, 20% took the vaccines the next year, 2022, and it's been dropping ever since then. In fact, now it's only about 8 or 9% of American adults over the age of 18 are taking the COVID-19 vaccine as of now. So most people figured it out. They figured these shots are not doing me any good. I'm still catching COVID anyways and passing it on to others. And they've heard about these nasty side effects like myocarditis, turbo cancers, nerve damage, miscarriages, and obviously these white fibrous clots and the clotting problems caused by the vaccines. So the good news is Americans have stopped taking the shots, but our government, our taxpayer money has been going to pay for millions and millions of vials of vaccines, a lot of which wind up in the garbage.
Well, and because especially I'm pretty sure it's the Pfizer vaccine because it was the most expensive one. I've had pharmacists tell me that you have to keep that in a temperature controlled a device of some kind or another that has a 10-degree window of latitude. If you get outside of that 10-degree, it's junk. You got to throw it away. And so the ones who were issuing that, you're right. They were telling me that over half of the vials they were having to throw away because it had an expiration on it, or that at some point in the process, the temperature had gone outside that 10-degree window. And it was just enormous waste. So they were getting, maybe 4 to 5 out of 10 of them where they would actually, give somebody a vaccine for it. Because you can remember the way it was working, there was a tent outside of the hospital or wherever. People were driving up in a car and they were sticking them in the arm and what have you. Well, that was winter and summer, right? And so they're pulling these vials out, giving these people these shots as quick as they can. And if it's set out, out of the cooler, quote unquote, for a certain period of time, they just had to pitch it and go grab another one. And
absolutely right. Yeah, there was a lady in Chico, California. Her name is Julie Threet. She was pro-vaccine. She actually volunteered the first year of the vaccine in 2021 to work at a mass vaccination clinic in Chico, California. And she watched over 43,000 people in that county get shots during that year that she was there. But she witnessed, as you said, there was sloppiness in the way they handled the vials. First of all, as you said, they were kept at these very extreme cold temperatures. They were supposed to be kept at minus 40 degrees Celsius until they needed to be used. And then they have to be taken out and warmed up to room temperature before they could be injected in someone. But they can't sit out too long or sit in sunlight. And they noticed that some of their syringes were sitting in bathed in sunlight. So then they quickly covered the windows at this particular facility in Chico, California. Like I said, they had to throw a lot of the vaccine away when they elapsed past that time. And actually, in the case of this, if you had gotten one of the shots that was after the mRNA had become inert because it had sat out too long under hotter temperatures, you actually can count yourself as a lucky one. This is a shot where you do not want the active mRNA ingredient, because it's the mRNA ingredient that's persisting in the body in a lot of people and causing production still, even after several years, of the spike protein. This was something that was not supposed to happen. When they released these shots, they were supposed to stay in your deltoid muscle in your upper arm, just stay there and produce. The mRNA was supposed to produce the spike protein for just a couple of days to a week, just enough to elicit an immune response to get your body ready for COVID when it came. But that's not what happened at all. The lipid nanoparticles in that vaccine carry that mRNA all over the body. It's set up shop all over the body, and it's continued to produce spike protein in some people for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe indefinitely. And that spike protein is what, like I said earlier, is binding with our natural fibrinogen to cause these white fibrous clots. So it's just, the shots have been a total disaster.
So they, I read a report where there was a gentleman in Germany had done a study of that, and he said the biggest problem with the vaccine was that they just copied the protocols for the flu vaccine and put it onto the COVID. And he said, well, where that one for the flu vaccine, it doesn't matter if it gets into a blood vessel or not. But because, like what you were talking about, the mRNA thing, if it gets into a blood vessel, then it carries it all over your body and starts creating that spike protein in places where you didn't want it created. But it was because of a bureaucratic, laziness, because even Pfizer said what you were talking about, it needs to go into the muscle. But instead, the CDC just copied the flu vaccine protocols, and that's what they issued on it.
You're right. There's a big difference there, because a traditional vaccine, there's only so much of the active ingredient that's in each vial. And once that gets injected to you, that's all the active ingredient you're ever going to get. Yeah. But in the case of these mRNA vaccines, what they're doing is they're instructing your body cells to make the antigen. And if they have no control over how much antigen gets made, then you don't know how much of a dose you're getting. You could be getting a dose that's 100, 1,000 times greater than the dose you were supposed to get, right? Because the mRNA is actually producing the antigen inside your body. It's making your body's cells produce it. So it's totally different than a traditional vaccine, much more dangerous. They could not control where it goes, how much of the dosage amount you get, how long it lasts, even what protein it produced 10% of the time through a process called frame shifting. The mRNA was being misread by our ribosomes in our cells, producing actually what's called non-sensory aberrant proteins about 10% of the time.
Affecting
technologies failed.
Yeah, affecting our T cell response. And,
correct.
So we had a little technical glitch today, but we wanted to play a couple of different clips, and I'll describe them to you. One of them was early in the COVID thing, where Dr. Peter McCullough from Baylor, who was in charge of surgery there, I believe it was, and he came out and he was talking about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and monoclonal antibodies as treatments for it. And, of course, he was a big advocate of, hey, we've got these therapies that work. We know they work. And we should be promoting that, not rushing headlong toward, we can still do the vaccine, but not in lieu of the therapies we know that work right now. And of course, he's also famous for saying that 85% of the people who died with COVID didn't have to die had we just employed those therapies. And of course, he was excoriated through the entire medical community, and some of his certifications were removed, and because he wouldn't, follow the party line. And so here recently, in fact, on Tulsi Gabbard's last day, she released a wealth of information that the mainstream press, same thing, right?
Yep.
Totally ignored, which clearly indicated, number one, that the lab leak thing was a real thing, and that we totally ignored that. But also, Fauci was responsible for financing that directly, financing that research done by that Chinese lab, which is kind of crazy. We're paying our enemy to research a bioweapon, right? And so and that was Tulsi's thing, but totally ignored by the press. But we're seeing all the way down the line, all of these things, even from social distancing and mask and all of that, you know, all the people who were telling us the truth back then are now being proven right. And so to the point where I think Anthony Fauci needs to be arrested for conspiracy to commit murder.
Well, he's got a presidential pardon, a preemptive pardon from Joe Biden for. It's interesting. He got a preemptive pardon when he claims that he's done nothing wrong. Well, what's he getting pardoned for if he hasn't committed a crime?
Well, the state of Missouri did not give him a pardon, and he committed a crime in Missouri. So if I was him, I wouldn't show up in Missouri.
I'm a big fan of Dr. Peter McCullough. I communicate with him often. In fact, I saw the article I think you're talking about. He did a Focal Points article recently about how he believes that the United States had actually broke the 1972 Bioweapons Treaty. And because instead of actually, producing, trying to defend ourselves against bioweapons from the future, we are actually actively producing bioweapons in conjunction, like you say, with the Wuhan lab in China. And there's all kinds of proof, thanks to Tulsi Gabbard and some of the information that's come out from the CIA, that is indeed what happened. That basically the SARS-CoV-2 virus is a combination of research we believe that not only the Americans and the Chinese have done, but also the Soviets over the past 4 or 5 decades. The Soviets, for example, have been working on viruses for a long time that make the blood coagulate quicker, and that, giving blood clotting issues. The Americans and the Chinese have been working on viruses to make them, in a gain of function research way, escape the immune system more easily. And then also replicate faster. So what we believe SARS-CoV-2 is a best of, where they've actually incorporated all 3 of those things. They've made the virus be able to replicate faster, evade the immune system, and coagulate the blood.
Well, so Dick Cheney was the guy who come up with the idea of gain of function, because his opinion was, if I remember correctly from the reporting, I don't think he's ever admitted to this, but that, hey, our enemies are studying it. We need to study it. And so we're not going to call it creating a bioweapon. We're going to call it gain of function. We're going to study it so that we know how to fight it in the future. Well, in order for you to do that, you have to create the bioweapon, right? Which was against a federal statute. But no more bioweapon research that came from the Carter administration. And if you call it gain of function, then it's a defense thing, right? It's not an offensive thing. And so we're not creating a bioweapon. We're just trying to create this gain of function so we can study how to fight it. Well, it's the same thing. It's a distinction without a difference.
And even gain of function research was banned here in the United States under the Obama administration. That's why Fauci had to move it offshore over the Wuhan lab in China to work on it. And then, of course, you saw the testimony he did with Rand Paul, where he kept refusing to admit that it is indeed gain of function research. He played a semantics game there, but he basically lied to Congress about it. So it's really, here's the shame of it all, is that Big Pharma is not stopping. They're continuing to produce these mRNA vaccines. In fact, Moderna recently got pre-approval of a vaccine, their mRNA-based vaccine to combat the regular flu through the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee at the FDA. So now it's going before the FDA director for final approval. And I think it's probably going to get approved because he usually rubber stamps whatever his Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, approves. So this is sad, right? Because regardless of what the antigen is, the payload inside these lipid nanoparticles that deliver this to our cells, this is a dangerous technology. And we believe, by the way, that the lipid nanoparticles are also involved in the formation of these white fibrous clots. At the moment,
I don't like the American people being the test bed for Pfizer's research.
Guinea pigs.
Guinea pigs, yeah.
Well, Tom, for anybody that may have joined late or may not be familiar with your work and maybe hearing it for the first time, I want to make sure we get timing down because I think this is important.
Yeah.
When you talk about your findings with these fibrous clots and the confirmation of that with the funeral directors you've been talking to, when did they find them? And again, the percentage. But when did they start finding? This is really key here because they were not found previous to a certain date. And we want to correlate that to the discussion.
That's right. In my very first survey I conducted at the end of 2022, I asked them, the embalmers around the world, when did you first start seeing this phenomenon? And there were a few that said they saw it in 2020, which is interesting because that's the year we had the COVID virus, but no vaccines yet. And as I said earlier, we do know that there's a spike protein on the surface of the virus. So it can, in some cases, if it can work its way into the bloodstream, which is difficult to do, because first of all, it has to fight through what's called your mucosal membrane. But if it does get in the bloodstream, we believe it can, the spike protein from the virus itself can produce these clots. But then the vast majority of the embalmers said they did not see this phenomenon until 2021, until after the rollout of the COVID vaccines.
Right.
As I said earlier, it's much easier for the spike protein from the vaccine to get into your blood system because obviously the shot's injected into you and into the muscle in the upper arm, and it does get picked up by the bloodstream. About 75 to 80% of it gets picked up by the bloodstream very quickly.
So prior to 2020 and 2021, how many of them saw these kind of clots before that then?
The embalmers I've spoke to, none of them said they saw these kind of clots. They were never and I've talked to Dr. John Campbell, a famous YouTuber over in the UK. John's got about 6 or 7 pathology books. He says, Tom, and they're all predate, 2020. And he looks in these pathology books. And he says, I'll see pictures of the traditional grape jelly clots and what's called chicken fat clots, but there's no photos of these white fibrous clots or description of them in these 6 or 7 pathology books I have. He says, this is a new pathology.
It's a new phenomenon. And if you could hold up a picture of that vial you have again, explain even the damage it was doing to the corpses and what the funeral directors were having to do to then preserve bodies because they couldn't even do the usual means because of them.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating. You're right, JP, for the embalmers and funeral directors. The embalmer used to take, prior to COVID and the vaccines coming out and this phenomenon happening, it took them about an hour to hour and a half to embalm a body. Basically, what they're doing is they're getting the body ready for a viewing in a funeral casket, right? So they're draining the blood off the body, and then they're putting preservative, formaldehyde, in there to keep the corpse from getting discolored or picking up a bad odor. So the most important places to get the fluid typically is the face and also your hands, because a lot of times those are the two parts of the body that are being seen during the showing in the casket. But they've been so frustrated with these white fibrous clots because they have to stop. They usually used to use one injection site point in the carotid artery in the neck to get the blood out and get formaldehyde in. But now they're having, because they're running into clots all over the body, they'll have to use multiple injection site points under the armpits, in the pelvis region, down the legs, because it's more difficult now to get fluid throughout. Approximately 23% of the bodies that in my surveys over the last 4 years have these white fibrous clots in them. So this is not a rare phenomenon. These things are quite prevalent. The 1 out of 4 corpses has them. So it's been very frustrating for the embalmers. And now they're embalming, when they run into a body riddled with these clots, it takes them about 2.5 to 3 hours to do the embalming, as opposed to the hour to hour and a half that it used to take. So it's double the time for the embalmer.
So it sounds like a legislative opportunity, Representative Peters. At least, it's not like shutting the gate after the cow's out of the barn. We can still collect this data today. And we were just talking about the alpha-gal of having a reporting thing like that. What do you think about a piece of legislation that allows for that?
Well, I think from the beginning, again, once the COVID vaccine started, every death certificate should have it should be a law that it is required that you have to put on there whether they were vaccinated or not, so that those records in the future, when we get years down the road, can be pulled and data can be collected again, so we can get some better numbers as to how that all affected everyone. I think that should have been going from the get-go.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent suggestion. Suggestion.
And so on embalmers also, that whenever they run into an incident of the things that Tom's talking about,
Make record
to-
that their clot was there, and
that
then
they was-
you'd have to go back
yeah.
and pull the research then whether or not they were vaccinated.
And
or
if
not.
they, and have a reporting mechanism
Yeah.
for that. So
Yeah.
Now, one
So
of the
what
difficult
yep.
things about embalmers and coroners and medical examiners finding the clots, because a lot of people have asked, well, why is it just the embalmers and funeral directors? Why aren't the medical examiners and coroners talking about this? First of all, they're hired by the government, and the government has a vested interest in not talking about the clots since they tended to push the vaccines. But also medical examiners and coroners, typically when they do an autopsy on a body, they'll take a close look at the heart, the brain, the lungs, and maybe test for toxicology, in case they suspect drug overdoses, those kind of things. But usually they do not take close looks at the vascular system, at all, the entire vascular system. So that's why the embalmers believe that's the embalmers, because they have to drain the blood out of the entire body and get the formaldehyde in. So
the other thing,
so they're the ones finding the clots. A lot of times they think the coroners and medical examiners are missing the clots.
Well, so the reality is that 99% of the people that pass away in Missouri don't see a medical examiner. We don't do autopsies on everybody. The only people who get autopsies are the ones either ordered by the police because of suspicion of foul play, or typically, which also includes suicides, or drug overdoses. And even then, the medical examiner is just doing toxicology. They're not doing a full, body scan kind of a thing. We too many times we watch CSI or NCIS or one of them, and we think that there's a doctor looking at everybody that dies. As not, embalmers are the only ones who look at every single corpse.
You're right. The medical examiners, they just don't have the budget. I talked to one in a county here in Ohio, and she said just that. She has to save the dollar she has for the suspected foul play ones. But you would think that, in a case that you had a son or daughter 20 or 30 years old, and they were physically fit, in perfect shape, and then they died suddenly, wouldn't you want to have an autopsy done on your child, your loved one, to see what caused that death? Especially if you suspected the COVID vaccines did it.
And you can here in Missouri, and you're going to pay for it.
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard there's been $10,000 to $15,000 to do an autopsy.
And that's the
then
cold
you can't
hard
be
truth.
guaranteed that the embalmer or the medical examiner or coroner will actually find anything, right?
Right. So that I'm reminded of a statistic when they were bragging about the COVID vaccine. They said it had an 85% efficacy, right? So it's 85% effective. Well, guess what? That lines up perfectly with natural immunity. So that was from Dr. McCullough's research. He said, herd immunity results in an 85% efficacy. Well, isn't it amazing that the vaccine lined up perfectly with natural immunity, which tells me natural immunity is what was providing the efficacy, not the vaccine.
And they actually played a little trick there too. They conflated two types of effectiveness, what's called absolute effectiveness versus relevant or effectiveness. And basically the way to describe it is, in absolute effectiveness, if you run a study, for example, and their vaccine, let's say 100 people take the vaccine and only one of them catches COVID. But then in a placebo group, there were 100 people that did not take the vaccine and 2 of them catch COVID.
Right.
They will tell you that the COVID vaccine is 100% effective because only one person caught it versus 2. So in a relative sense, it was only 1% more effective than the group that didn't take it. But because in an absolute fashion, it was 2 caught it versus 1 in the placebo, or 2 in the placebo group versus 1.
So the same trick with remdesivir. You remember that, it's 90% effective, but that was for the 2 weeks immediately after the treatment. And then the person died anyway because because it wasn't working. They were just going to live for 2 weeks anyway, right? I mean, more than 2 weeks anyway. And so they died shortly after the 2 weeks, but they were only counting if the person was still alive in that 2 week period. I mean, you talk about dirty tricks just to try to get something approved or Again, it was, and which goes into that, hey, we can't trust the government thing anymore.
I had an interesting interaction with my doctor, Tom. I've told you this probably before, but I did not get vaccinated. And so I came up time. It was probably 2023 or 2024. Came time for my annual exam. So you do your lab results and all that kind of good stuff. So they're checking your cholesterol, all the typical stuff they collect. And I reached out to my doctor and I said, hey, before you do the lab order, can you have me check for COVID antibodies? She said, yeah. I said, I want it done. And so that was one of the boxes I got checked. And so did the lab work. I go meet with her 3 weeks later and we're going over everything. She said, yeah, everything looks good here, just going down the line. She said, now I want to make sure I understand. You did not get vaccinated. I said, no, I did not. Interesting. Very interesting. And I said, well, why is that? She said, well, you have double the amount of antibodies somebody vaccinated has, which tells me you were exposed to the disease at some point. Your body fought it off. You now do have immunity and you can't get the shot or you will get sick. I said, it's a good thing I'm not going to get the thing anyway. But right there, proving immunity, not social distancing and masking and all the other stuff that Fauci and them tried to. I knew something was wrong already. My antennas were already up because I remember Fauci steadfast saying Trump will face a pandemic during his presidency. Like he knew for a matter of fact one was coming, which I was like, man, he must be a heck of a fortune teller to be able to predict that one so profoundly. And then here it came a few months later. My wife, who's my wife's been a 20-year RN. They came out on the stage and we actually realized that her and my stepdaughter had it 2 months before they announced what it was. And they came out in March of that year and said, there's this thing called COVID. Here's what it's doing. Here's the symptoms. And here's what we're going to do because medical science says we're going to mask and we're going to social distance. That's the best way to fight this. And she looks at me and she says, that's not what medical science says at all. They're lying. They're wrong. I said, oh, no, we got a problem. So right there from the get-go. Tom, thanks so much for all the information. Let everybody know where they can reach out to you for more information, also where they can get the information that you're sharing currently.
JP, I'm glad you're so wide awake. That's awesome. What a story. They can find me at our free Substack that my assistant Laura Kasner runs at Laura, Laura, Kasner, KASNER.substack.com. It's a free Substack. We don't charge for it. Or they can just email me. If an embalmer or funeral director or vascular surgeon, endovascular specialist wants to contact me about the white fibrous clots that I know they're seeing in their corpses or patients and living patients, you can contact me at Thomas Haviland at sbcglobal.net.
And we have that information in the comment section for you to reach out to Tom and get more information. Tom, thanks so much again, and we'll have you on again the show in the future.
Yeah,
thanks so much for your work on this.
Appreciate it, Tom.
I'll keep swinging.
Sounds good. Keep swinging. We definitely need you to stay in the fight. All right, that is Thomas Haviland. Some obviously really, really interesting stuff. I wanted to get to a couple of comments that we had here before.
Okay. Yeah.
We got just about 12 minutes, believe it or not, before the end of the show.
Oh, my goodness.
Andy Falk, 368 from YouTube. We're getting some YouTube comments now. Says, good job, informative. Also had another comment here. I'm trying to figure this one out. Trump is Trump, correct. More anti-white. And then a word that starts with S and then ends with hit. I'll just leave it at that. Or Evil Donald. Those are your options. I'm trying to figure out what he's exactly saying there. But yeah. And let's see. I'm going to keep scrolling down here. We had some more comments. We got our very own Lisa Weinbaum. Good morning from X.
Oh, thanks, Lisa.
And then we've got Kathy Sanford Dillon, who usually is listening on Facebook. This time she's over on YouTube at Kathy Dillon 1577. Good morning and happy Friday. If that's a term, by the way, that she came up with. Oh yeah, and Dave loves that. Friday. Happy Friday. So, and then of course Lisa that's also saying good morning from Facebook. So
I get that.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had enough coffee this morning.
Yeah, well, sometimes my hearing gets in the way of me understanding. So it was. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So she coined that phrase, huh?
She did. Yeah. She did. She actually several years ago, and we've been using it ever since. So just on a quick before I want to take the last few minutes of the show to go over more stuff with the election coming up and some other state issues. But real quick, what were your thoughts on Tom's findings here?
I've actually noticed this on back, and I honestly think, when you told me the name, it was like I was trying to connect all that. And so now after having seen him, I saw his videos. I mean, it's been at least 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, this is a thing. I mean, we should be concerned about this. why isn't this national news, and why isn't our federal government, at least taking a look at what's going on here? That's exactly what we hear, and which now, if we fast forward to today, we get, Tara and I both get a lot of comments from folks who are clearly have an issue with the government, and they're not, and they're folks I've known for years, and they express these sentiments against the government that they would have probably been, I guess, ambivalent about prior to, but they're sharing some of the same things that I'm feeling about. If they'll lie to us about things this important, they'll lie to us about anything. What's your feelings on that, Tara?
Oh yeah, no, I'm with JP from the very beginning. It was all a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yep.
So I as well not vaccinated. None of my family's vaccinated, and all of us conspiracy theorists that took so much crap over the that long period. It's unfortunate and fortunate, right, that it's all being proven correct.
Yeah.
I remember getting into a conversation with, it was actually people from my work, because they ended up, and I didn't care. I had my position. I was standing tall, and they found out I wasn't getting vaccinated. I was filing for a religious exemption, which, by the way, was never approved or denied. It's still in the pending status somewhere out in the stratosphere, sitting out there. Tom ended up losing his career over it, but still stood the fight and is still fighting to this day.
But
be
getting compensated now.
100%. In fact, that's
back
beginning to happen
Yep.
now. That should happen 100%. And I got into a conversation with them, and they said, "Well, you need to get the vaccine to protect me." And I said, time out. If your vaccine's as effective as you say it is, and you get it, then you're safe.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm making the choice for myself, and I'm saying no.
Yeah.
So when you actually,
right?
People would have been really easy to get on the fence and go, well, I don't know. And no, I'm going to use my brain and common sense, which says, if you get the vaccine, you're safe. I'm choosing not to because I'm making that choice for myself.
Yeah.
And it just takes a little bit of time to just think about it and apply the common sense factor. And especially if it tends to be a liberal policy, it usually just falters because they really don't have anything to stand on. And all I'm seeing now, it seems like the people that are still getting tested positive for COVID, even to this day, are the ones that are vaccinated fully and then fully boosted. Right. And they're still getting it. I'm like, well, then your thing wasn't very effective, was it?
No. So I had that exact same situation way prior to COVID. I was a returning student going back to college, right? I spent a year in college right out of high school, and then took a 10-year break between my freshman and sophomore years. So I returned to college, and I had enrolled and everything, and I was in classes for 2 weeks, and so I get called to the health office, and they said, "Well, you're going to have to leave school because we don't have your shot records." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm 28 years old. I guarantee you I had every one." And they said, "Oh, well, you can't hang around because you haven't had the measles vaccine." And I said, "So what's the issue?" "Well, you may contract measles." And I said, "Has everyone else in this institution, do they have their shot records, and have they been vaccinated against measles?" "Oh yeah, absolutely. They couldn't go to school."
Then they're fine.
So I said, "So I'm the only one that can be affected by this?" And they said, "Yeah, so." I said, "Well, if I'm the only one we're worried about, don't you think that that's something that it should be just me worried about?" I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sign whatever waiver that you want me to sign to absolve you of any liability."
Because that's what it is. Like, yeah.
And then I will take that responsibility all on myself. If I contract measles from someone who's been vaccinated, by the way, and can't get measles, well, then that's going to be my fault. And they said, "I guess you're right." And so
isn't it weird how the institutions of knowledge somehow didn't apply knowledge to the situation?
But that was back in the day when there were still people with common sense running those institutions, right? And so now we've seen this,
which is a new thing now. That's very rare to find these days.
Well, we've seen this. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Idiocracy or not.
I haven't seen it yet. No.
Well, you should watch it because we are fast approaching. Have you seen that, Tara?
I've not.
Well, I mean, it's a kind of a, well, it's more satirical than it is funny. I mean, it's meant to be humorous. It's meant to be a comedy. but it is very satirical, and it just shows you what it is. It is the world of the future when AI does all our thinking for us, and the machine is what, and the people are just dumb. That's why they call it idiocracy. But I encourage everybody to watch that movie, not because it's such a good movie, but because of the theme that it has. And you sit there and you will sit there and say to yourself, that's happening right now.
I remember being a kid, and this is, I don't know if it was just really mature. People know me say I'm definitely not mature, so I don't, but somehow I even as a kid knew that it would be really easy for people to run the government and just control everything. Like, it's just not that hard to figure out that could happen.
Right.
But I didn't want to believe that was actually happening. And then I saw it, and I agree with you. There's a movie out there I watched, and it's not because it's a great movie. It's because it made me think. Wag the Dog.
Oh, yes. I love that movie.
And when I watched Wag the Dog, I said, that's real easy then, even than what I realized, to run it the way you want it and control information. Whoever has control of information, they've got the upper hand, because then they're going to tell you whatever they want, and then it's up to you to go figure out if it's actually true or not. And most people won't take the time to do the research.
Yeah, there's another one that's called, I think it's called Network News or something like that. And for some reason, I'm thinking that Dustin Hoffman was in it. And he's talking to his editor about a story that they were doing on a politician. And he says, is it true? And he goes, no, of course it's not true, but it's accurate. And it was like, whoa, that is a really, and that movie goes all the way back to the 80s, I believe. But any parting thoughts for us, Darren?
Parting thoughts for the day. We're cleaning up debris in Rolla today.
We
had a mini tornado come through last evening.
Yeah, and apparently it was wasn't forecasted. I mean, suddenly sirens are going off, and I'm getting reports of damage, but then I would click on the St. Louis channel, so usually track these kind of storms.
No, it came out of nowhere. My
yeah.
son and I were at the Applebee's at 9:30, and we ran across the street at the gas station, and all of a sudden he goes, "Mom, the sirens are going off." And I was like, and we had just got, it was pelting rain.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll be darned, the sirens are going off. And then I did see a lot of hubbub again on Facebook this morning. They're like, well, there was the sirens going off, but nobody knew what to do because there wasn't an NWS report. Well, if it comes out of nowhere, I mean, would you rather not have the signals go off? And decide what to do?
Sirens are better than nothing.
Yeah. So there's always somebody out there that, we can't always predict everything, but sirens went off. And so I drove by where Dollar General is. Some roofs are missing up the ZX, and the Dollar General got hit again. Poor Dollar General.
Yeah.
Poor
Can't
Dollar
seem to catch a
General.
break.
This is like the second time they've been hit. So
same thing happened at my house. I was over in Laclede County knocking doors, and it got rained on over there, but it wasn't so bad. And I come home, and there's a big tree in my front yard that just missed my house by about 15 feet. And sirens didn't go off. Deanna told me, no sirens, no nothing.
How many minutes is there?
We got about 2 minutes, right at 2 minutes.
I was going to say, so the one I'm going to give a beat this morning. So a friend of mine who lives in St. James has a rental house in Rolla. And so the storm came through, and the neighbor's tree blew on her rental house, right?
Oh, no.
You have to go to the city and get a $90 permit in order for them to turn your electric back on. So she went to City Hall, and she was like, well, this is an act of Mother Nature. I can't believe that I have to get a $90 permit. And they said, well, you have to, during the tornado, she said, we waived it because there was too many people. So now last week, July 4th, all these people had storm damage, had to go get a permit. And so now we had another event last evening. So they're going to have to go get another permit. So I don't live in the city limits. I'd like to proceed this conversation with that. So I've got no skin in the game, but I did go to a friend of mine on the city council, and I said, $90 for a permit because of a storm. I think that's a little
excessive.
It's a little excessive. So I asked him if he'd work on that. Anyway.
Well, we got about a minute left. Again, we thank everybody for listening. Don, thanks for guest hosting this show. Our guest, Tom Haviland, Chris Adamo, of course, Tara's been here for the last hour and a half with us. That's been amazing. And just take a couple seconds again, encourage people to get out, be aware of the issues, and vote. We got 3 weeks left, and we got a big election coming up here on August 4th.
Yep, and so you won't have to put up with the cheap substitute for Dave next week. He'll be back.
Dave will be back in the saddle. Yeah, we're still trying to get used to this new format. By the way, those that
wait a minute, it's a cheap substitute.
There he is, right there.
In the door.
I'm a little late.
Finally woke up.
He waits till the show's over.
For the
No,
last
I've been listening.
for the last 20 seconds, we got the boss in here. So
I've been listening.
Happy Friday.
Thank you.
So he's here to properly chastise me for ruining his show. So.
No, you did great. That's why you're on the show, because you did great the other times.
Well, thanks everybody for putting up with me this week, and tune in next week when Dave will have some more fascinating stuff.
next Friday.